Every morning, Linda and I have this habit of staying in bed for a few extra minutes after the alarm goes off. We've been together long enough to know what works best for us. Those warm, lazy minutes feel so good, but they come at a cost, a frantic rush to get ready for work. Back when the kids were still at home, that mad dash included getting them off to school. Now that they're grown and out of the house, we find ourselves lingering in bed even longer before facing the morning chaos, which always leads to the drive to work. To make things more stressful, I had to leave the house a good 20 minutes earlier than usual today. Linda had to work late tonight, so we decided to carpool since our offices aren't far from each other. But instead of taking my car, I opted to ride my mountain bike to work. The weather forecast promised a beautiful spring day, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity. I took the last bite of my toast, washed it down with a swig of coffee, and was ready to head out. "I'm on my way, honey," I called out toward the bathroom, where Linda was still getting ready. I waited for her to respond, maybe poke her head out the door, but I got nothing. "I'll see you tonight." "I love you," I added, though I was in a rush and didn't have time to dwell on her silence. With that, I tossed my keys in my backpack and headed out the door. Let me introduce myself. I'm John Harris, a 53-year-old office manager at the State Department of Public Works. My wife, Linda, is 49 and works as an administrative assistant in the main office of a manufacturing company. We're a good-looking couple, if I do say so myself, but Linda is stunning, especially for her age. She doesn't look anywhere near 50, and I've noticed plenty of men turning their heads when we're out together. About 10 minutes into my ride, my phone pinged with a text message. A few seconds later, it started ringing. Trying to navigate traffic on a bike while answering a call is a challenge, so I ignored it. By the time I got to work, I was in such a hurry to get dressed for an 8:45 meeting that I forgot all about the phone calls. It wasn't until my afternoon coffee break that I remembered to check my messages. I had 5 from Linda, 2 texts and 3 voicemails. The first text came in at 8:10, saying, "You grabbed the wrong keys." "Call me." The second one arrived at 8:35, "I'm waiting for your call." When I finally listened to the voicemails, the first one, left at 8:11, said, "Hi, honey. You took the wrong set of keys when you left. Could you drop them off at my work this morning? I'm going to need them. Call me." Her voice had a sharp edge to it, which was odd. She didn't need those keys at work. They use a fancy security system with key cards. The second voicemail, left around 10:15, was even more irritable. "What are you doing, John? I've been waiting for the keys all morning. Call me. I have better things to do than wait for you." After 25 years together, 23 of them married, I could tell she was fuming. Her anger dripped from every word. Before I played her last message, I pulled out my keys and laid them on my desk. The final voicemail, left at 12:55, was practically a shout. "Where are you? I'm still waiting for my keys. I don't know what you were thinking this morning, but they better be on my desk this afternoon." Linda wasn't holding back. She was livid. I was taken aback. Lately, it seemed like Linda was always mad at me over nothing. I thought maybe it was something to do with her approaching 50, maybe hormonal changes or something. That's what she told me when I asked why she was acting so differently. She snapped at me when I suggested she see a doctor about it, get some hormone therapy, or whatever they do for menopause. Life with Linda had become pretty difficult lately. Our relationship was strained, but it seemed ridiculous that she'd blow up over a set of keys she didn't even need. I've been trying to work on myself, but I'm no pushover. 2 can play at this anger game, I figured. So, I decided not to call her back and just wait until 5 o'clock to bring her the damn keys. A little after 5, I reached her office, just in time to see her pulling out of the parking lot. Big surprise. Despite the traffic and my bike's capabilities, there was no way I could catch up with her. Not that it mattered, we were both heading home. I knew she'd eventually get out of the gridlock and pick up a speed I couldn't match. So, I stuck to my usual, more direct route to see if I could beat her home. But then, something strange happened. I was caught off guard when I saw her car turning toward a different part of town. It was an easier route for me. I could cut through the park, but definitely not the best way for her. She turned onto a street lined with two-story duplexes and parked at the curb. I had a feeling something was up, so I slowed down and watched from a distance as she climbed the stairs and rang a doorbell, all while typing away on her phone. Even from where I was, I could hear her phone chime with a text. She read the message, walked back to her car, and drove off. What the hell just happened? I muttered to myself. Linda, who was supposed to be working late, had shown up at some random apartment. I gripped the keys in my hand, my mind racing. I recognized her car keys and our house keys, but what was really going on here? However, there was another key that I didn't recognize. I had a hunch that this was the key Linda was so desperate to get back. I walked up to the duplex, climbed the stairs, inserted the key into the front door lock, and turned it. The click of the lock felt like the end of my marriage to Linda. I didn't open the door, though. I needed a moment to think. What was I going to do? The rising anger in me made it tempting to barge into my wife's lover's apartment and tear the place apart. Or maybe I could wait for him and beat the crap out of him. Or I could just go to the police and end up in jail. No, acting out of blind anger wasn't the right move. But I had to do something. I glanced inside the apartment. Technically, I was trespassing, but if I moved fast, I wouldn't get caught. The first thing I saw was a neatly stacked pile of mail on a small table in the hallway. I grabbed the phone bill from the top. The letter was addressed to Erik Larson. I had no idea who he was, but the phone bill could be useful. I slipped it into my backpack. That was enough for now. I didn't want to get caught snooping around someone else's apartment, so I got out of there quickly. Instead of heading straight home, I drove to a nearby hardware store. Within minutes, I had a duplicate key made. I expected Linda to be home by the time I got back, but her car wasn't in the driveway. Whatever her lover had texted her, it must have been to meet somewhere else. I decided to mess with her a bit. I called, but she didn't answer. I didn't leave a text, but I did send her a voicemail. I'm running late too, but I'll bring the keys soon. I'll see you at your office. It only took a few seconds to get a reply. That won't be necessary. I've made other arrangements. Just go home, was her immediate response. In her head, she was probably thinking, and leave me alone, idiot. I had a lousy evening. Linda didn't get home until 10 o'clock, giving me a good 4 hours to stew over what had happened. First, I needed proof of her cheating. With a copy of the key now on my keychain, it would be easy to gather what I needed. The phone bill pointed directly to her lover, Erik Larson. They were constantly on the phone and texting each other, even when Linda and I were together in the evenings. All this time, I thought she was texting the kids. Did I really need to know why she had decided to leave me? No, it didn't matter anymore. Our love had faded over the past 6 months. Indifference, constant nagging, and blame can only go on for so long before a man's love fades. Now I saw it clearly. Linda had been distancing herself from our marriage for a while. Today's discovery was just the final blow to a marriage that had already gone to hell. We were done. There's no benefit to proving adultery in our state. Irreconcilable differences would be the reason, and the judge would split our assets 50-50. But as the cheated husband, I felt I had a lot to gain by reclaiming some of my pride. I wasn't going to let Linda get away with lying while married. The truth would be known to our kids, parents, and friends. And knowing how Linda had changed over the past few months, I wouldn't be surprised if she tried to paint me as the bad guy somehow. I did toy with many revenge scenarios, but I decided not to go down that path. I only had a few years before early retirement, and I didn't want to mess that up. Retirement wouldn't be what I had envisioned all those years ago with Linda, but it was better than ending up in jail and losing my job. At least I'd enjoy my retirement my way, not Linda's. When she finally got home, I decided to let her irritation work in my favor. Maybe she'd start a small argument, which could excuse my icy behavior over the next few days. But sex with Eric must have calmed her down a bit. When she walked in, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. Linda seemed surprised to find me still sitting in the living room. She tossed the spare car key into the dish by the door and grabbed her usual set, which I'd placed there earlier. After one look, she tossed them into her purse. I expected a grunt or something, but she didn't say a word. She headed straight for the bathroom. "I'm tired," she muttered to no one in particular as she walked down the hallway. "I'm going to take a shower and go to bed." "What?" I called after her. "No love tonight?" Her only response was to close the bathroom door behind her and lock it. Do you know many married people who lock the bathroom door? I hadn't noticed it before, but now that I thought about it, she did that a lot when she came home late. God, I was so stupid. No wonder she was leaving me. Before going to bed, I watched the evening show. I hoped Linda was sound asleep. But I swear, she was still awake. Sleep was escaping both of us. The next morning, under the pretense of a meeting, I left early in my car. Instead of heading to work, I went to an electronics store and bought some interesting items. It only took me a couple of hours to wire Eric Larson's apartment for sound and video. While I was there, I had time to look around. The place was nicely furnished, with many items that looked like antiques. I don't know if he had a maid, but the apartment was spotless, not a speck of dust anywhere. I wondered if he was a stickler for cleanliness. It gave me something to think about as I set up the equipment. I had hoped my little surveillance setup would stay under the radar for a few days, at least long enough to capture some scandalous photos of my wife and her lover. It turns out I didn't need to worry about that at all. Back at the office after lunch, another text from Linda popped up, telling me not to wait up because she had another late meeting. I went ahead and scheduled an appointment with the lawyer for the next day. That evening, I drove past Larson's apartment and spotted Linda's car. Despite everything that had transpired over the past 24 hours, the sight of her car still made my heart sink, a fresh stab of her betrayal. Tomorrow was going to be crucial. I drove back home, tempted to check into the town motel. But it seemed absurd to waste money on a place I didn't want to be when none of this was my fault. Once back, I thought about sleeping in the guest bedroom but decided against it. After all, I wasn't the one who had wrecked our marriage. Let Linda take that room. I dumped all of her belongings into the guest room haphazardly, whole drawers piled on the bed and clothes yanked out of her side of the closet and thrown in there. It was a surprisingly therapeutic task. With each armful I carried to the guest room, I felt a bit better. When Linda came home that evening, she looked even worse than she had the night before. She had that disheveled look that suggested she had just come from a marathon session with someone else. Again, she was caught off guard by my presence. She didn't offer any explanations for her tardiness or appearance, as if there was anything she could say that would make it better. I couldn't believe I was the source of such pain. With the impending divorce hanging over us, I grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the bedrooms. "What are you doing, John?" "You're hurting me," she whimpered. I forced myself to sound more confident than I felt. I knew I was on the brink of losing her completely. I needed to act quickly and keep my composure. "Shut up, bitch," I said loudly, surprising even myself with the harshness of my words. It was so unlike me to speak like that, as if I were hitting her with my words. Suddenly, the accusatory glares I'd been receiving for months turned into fear. But was it fear of violence or fear of exposure? I had no idea, and I wasn't about to ask. I opened the guest bedroom door so she could see her belongings stacked in disarray. "Starting tonight, this is your room," I said sharply, shoving her inside. "We're no longer husband and wife." "Stay away from me," I added. "In fact, it'd be better if you packed up and left right now." Linda was furious and tried to resist, insisting, "Oh no, you bastard. If anyone's sleeping in the guest room, it's you." She ranted about all she had done for the kids, for me, and the house, demanding respect or for me to leave. Did I want to argue with her? No. I shoved her back into the guest room with a surprising force. "I'm giving you two choices," I growled. "Either you stay here until the divorce is final, or you move in with Erik Larson right now." Her reaction to Larson's name was immediate. Despite her recent behavior, she knew me well enough to realize I was aware of her affair and had no intention of forgiving her. She knew we would never part as friends. Who could be friends with someone who stabbed you in the back? I could see the defeat in her eyes. She stumbled into the room, threw her clothes aside, and sat on the bed, tears streaming down her face. She muttered something I couldn't catch. "What?" I shouted. "I'm sorry," she said louder. "I was so stupid." "Please don't hate me, you know me, Linda," I replied. "I won't hate you forever, but I'm sure I won't love you either. Hell, I don't even know if I can be around you." I began to close the door but decided to add one final blow. "I'd prefer if you left as soon as possible," I said firmly. "Just sign the divorce papers when they arrive, and we'll never have to see each other again." I shut the door, leaving her behind with her sobs as the last sound I heard. The next day, I retrieved my spy gear from Larson's place and then headed to my attorney. Since my demands were straightforward, he assured me the divorce papers would be ready within 2 days. I paid him up front and left. I tried to return to work, but it proved futile. I finally explained my situation to my supervisor, who advised me to take a few days off. When I drove home, I saw Linda moving her things out and parked further down the street. From the video I had, I recognized Erik Larson helping her. I wanted to beat him up, but with his extra 3 inches and 40 pounds, that wasn't a practical option. I drove away. That night, the real impact of Linda's betrayal hit me. My anger faded, replaced by an overwhelming loneliness I had never felt before. The divorce would have been even more devastating if our children were still living with us. While the absence of them was a blessing, it was also a curse, leaving me with no one to lean on. My parents were gone, and my brother and sister lived far away. I decided to reach out to my 2 daughters, only to find out that Linda hadn't even contacted them yet. She had always been in touch with them while they were in college, so I guess it was easier for her to lie to me than to them. A few weeks ago, if someone had asked me how to handle a cheating spouse, I would have said to stay discreet, keep the peace, and honor the 23 years of commitment as a wife and mother. But now, suffering and desperate for either love or sympathy, I had to confide in my 2 daughters, Emily and Sarah. I was relieved when neither of them questioned me when I revealed that their mother had betrayed me and left me for another man. For a moment, I worried they might have known all along, but seeing their shock and distress reassured me. My barely contained sobs seemed to confirm my story. Their support was a comfort, but it was also a mistake. By the time I reached out to the kids, I had already finished a whole bottle of wine. I'm not much of a drinker. Linda and I would share a bottle or 2 of wine a week, or maybe have a few beers. The problem wasn't the drinking itself, but the self-pity fueled by alcohol. When faced with failure, a man must own up to it. Yet, despite my efforts, I couldn't understand what drove Linda away. My job never interfered with my family life. I only traveled for retraining once every 5 years, and my overtime was minimal and predictable. To be honest, I might have let myself go a bit since turning 50, but I wasn't overweight or out of shape. Larson didn't appear much younger or fitter than I was. I wondered if he was a better lover, which was an area where I had limited experience. Before meeting Linda, I had only 4 girlfriends between the ages of 18 and 28, and Linda and I had a lot to learn together. I didn't think Linda left me for social status either. His apartment wasn't extravagant, and while his furniture was nice, he wasn't a father. We were likely in the same income bracket. As I curled up in the fetal position that night, it struck me that there was no real reason for her departure, other than the fact that I was simply who I was. Can you really struggle with being yourself? Could I stop existing just so everything could be all right? The next morning, around 10 o'clock, I got a call. Without checking the caller ID, I answered the phone. "You son of a bitch," Linda yelled. "You shouldn't have been so rude to Emily and Sarah." For a moment, I considered hanging up, but I also wanted to confront her to end this nightmare. "What's rude, sweetie?" I asked. "Is it the months of cheating, moving in with your lover, or is it all of the above?" There was only silence, which I despised. "Linda, I still have some feelings for you," I said. "I'm not sure if it's my male or female side, maybe just my foolish side, but there's one thing I won't do: lie to our family." "You wouldn't dare," she pleaded. "Not Daddy, please." "Watch me," I said, and hung up. My finger hovered over the speed dial for Linda's father, but I didn't press it. Walter had been struggling since his wife passed away from breast cancer 2 years ago. He was a good man, but in his 80s, his health was fragile, and his will to live seemed a bit weak. I could certainly relate to that feeling today. And he was a good man. I figured it was better to let him live in peace rather than let his daughter's actions ruin his life. My anger began to fade, so I decided to inform Linda of my choice. I picked up Larson's cell phone bill and dialed the number listed. A man's voice answered. I hesitated for a moment. "Linda Harris, please?" I asked. There was a pause, and I could hear someone crying in the background, presumably Linda. "Who's asking?" Larson's voice came through. "Her father, you piece of shit," I lied, barely containing my fury. "And don't expect to talk to her. Just tell my daughter to forget me. Leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and me alone. Goodbye, asshole." Less than a minute later, feeling a bit guilty, I called Linda's cell phone. She answered quickly but was still sobbing. "Hello, Linda," I said, breaking the silence. "Did you have a good day?" "John, why?" she asked. "Why did you tell my father? It could destroy him. He's been in such poor health lately. You knew that." "Hey, don't shift the blame," I said, struggling with the harsh words. "It wasn't your father on the phone with your lover, it was me. I care about your father, and your cheating would have killed him. I want to make this clear. Are you listening?" "Yes," she replied. "I'm listening. Don't ever let this guy come between me and my daughters, or your father will know everything about you. All the ugly details," I warned her. "Don't think I'm joking. I trusted you for most of my adult life. I didn't think it was possible, but you shattered that trust. I'm fighting not to just end you on sight. I have so much hatred for you right now, and it defines me at this moment. Do you understand?" "Yes," she said through her tears. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this." "Neither did I," I said, and hung up. 6 months later, I received the official divorce papers, marking the end of my marriage. I had gotten over my bout of depression, but something still felt missing in my life. I couldn't quite figure out what it was. I tried dating a few women, but things never went far. It seemed like they could sense the emotional baggage I carried. I even had a one-night stand with a work acquaintance who was also divorced. But even that felt hollow, just 2 people seeking a quick fix for their loneliness. It left me feeling even more isolated than before. One evening, after coming home from work, a revelation struck me. Since moving into my new apartment and selling the old house to split the proceeds, I had started to name the dust bunnies collecting around the place. "Hi, Jack," I greeted, peeking out the door. I was reverting to my bachelor days, naming the dust clumps I found everywhere, mostly behind doors and under the bed. Jack was stationed by the front door, while Roger and Bugs had made a home under the bed. I almost grabbed the vacuum cleaner from the closet, feeling embarrassed at the thought that Larson would never let his place get so messy. As I curled up in the fetal position that night, I had another moment of realization. There was no clear reason for Linda's departure. It was simply because I was who I was. Can one truly struggle with their own identity? Could I just stop existing so everything could be okay? The next morning, around 10 o'clock, I answered the phone without checking the caller ID. "You son of a bitch," Linda yelled. "You shouldn't have been so rude to Emily and Sarah." For a moment, I considered hanging up, but part of me wanted to face the confrontation to end this nightmare. "What's rude, sweetie?" I asked. "Is it the months of cheating, moving in with your lover, or is it all of the above?" There was only silence, which I loathed. "Linda, some part of me still cares about you," I said. "I don't know if it's my male side, female side, or just my foolish side, but one thing I won't do is lie to our family." "You wouldn't dare," she pleaded. "Not Daddy, please." "Watch me," I said, and hung up. My finger hovered over the speed dial for Linda's father, but I didn't press it. Walter had been struggling since his wife died of breast cancer 2 years ago. He was a good man, but in his 80s, his health was fragile, and his will to live seemed weak. I could understand that today. And he was a good man. I figured it was better to let him live in peace rather than ruin his life because of his daughter's actions. My anger began to subside, so I decided to tell Linda my decision. I picked up Larson's cell phone bill and dialed the number listed. A man answered. I hesitated for a moment. "Linda Harris, please," I asked. There was a pause, and I could hear someone crying in the background, presumably Linda. "Who's asking?" Larson's voice came through. "Her father, you piece of shit," I lied, unable to suppress my anger. "And don't bother talking to her. Just tell my daughter to forget me. Leave my grandchildren, my son-in-law, and me alone. Goodbye, asshole." Less than a minute later, feeling a pang of remorse, I dialed Linda's cell number. She answered right away but was still crying. "Hello, Linda," I said, breaking the silence. "Did you have a good day?" "John, why?" she asked. "Why did you tell my father? It could destroy him. He's been in such poor health lately. You knew that." "Hey, don't shift the blame," I said, forcing myself to utter the harsh words. "It wasn't your father who was on the phone with your lover, it was me. I care about your father, and your cheating would have killed him. Let me make something clear. Are you listening?" "Yes," she said. "I'm listening. Don't let this guy come between me and my daughters, or your father will find out everything about you. All the raw details, as you put it," I warned. "Don't think I'm joking. I've trusted you for most of my adult life. I didn't think it was possible, but you shattered that trust. I'm struggling not to just end this right now. I'm filled with so much hatred for you, and that's what defines me at this moment. Do you get it?" "Yes," she said between sobs. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this." "Neither did I," I replied, and hung up. 6 months later, I got the official divorce papers marking the end of my marriage. Although I had moved past my depression, there was still a sense of emptiness in my life. I couldn't quite pinpoint what was missing. I tried dating again, but didn't get very far. I guess the women I met could sense my emotional baggage. I had a one-night stand with a fellow work colleague who was also divorced. But even that left me feeling more alone. Sex felt meaningless without love and affection. We were just two adults seeking momentary relief, but it only deepened my sense of isolation. One evening, after coming home from work, an epiphany hit me. Since moving into my new apartment and selling the old house, I had been giving names to the dust clumps around the place. "Hi, Jack," I said, peeking out the door. I was reliving my bachelor days, naming the dust bunnies I found everywhere, especially behind doors and under the bed. Jack stood by the front door, while Roger and Bugs resided under the bed. I almost reached for the vacuum cleaner, feeling embarrassed at the thought that Larson would never let his place get this messy. I almost grabbed the vacuum cleaner from the closet, feeling embarrassed that Larson would never leave his place in such a mess. The next day, I tore off a corner of a condom wrapper and left it lying on the floor by the bed. I shook up the blankets, jumped around a bit in the middle of the bed to dishevel the sheets, and then carefully placed the blanket back in almost the same position. I also left marks from 2 glasses on the coffee table, some ashes in the toilet, and kept the ceiling fan running. I picked up a porcelain trinket, smashed it, and tossed the pieces in the trash. I grabbed a rare bottle of wine from the shelf, chose the dustiest one, opened it, poured it out, and left the empty bottle in the trash. That was my grand finale. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah, my youngest. "Daddy, you have to do something," she pleaded. "Anything for you, honey," I responded. "Help Mommy," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "She's at the police station. This guy hit her, and she called the police. She has nowhere to go and doesn't want to go back there anymore. He's gotten really violent lately." "Hang in there, honey," I interrupted. "I'm not the guy to help your mother. I hate her deeply and, honestly, I'm kind of enjoying what's happening to her, not the beating, but the mess she's made with her new guy." "What's going on, Daddy?" Sarah begged. "She's my mom and she needs help." Okay. "It's only because you asked," I said. "Don't expect me to do more than just pick her up and drive her somewhere." "Thanks, Dad," she said. A few minutes later, I was at the police station. Linda was still being questioned, so I had to wait. I sent her a note letting her know I was waiting. An hour later, I felt a pang of guilt when I saw Linda, her left eye swollen and black. She cried as she approached me with open arms. I struggled, but managed to keep her at arm's length. "Hey, I'm here because my daughter asked me to come," I said. "Don't think for a second that we're going to be friends. I'll give you a ride wherever you need to go, but that's all." I walked out of the police station without looking back to see if she was following. Her sobs were the only indication she was near. Once we were in the car, I asked, "Where do you want to go?" "Home," she replied. Without a word, I drove to our destination. Linda only reacted when I turned onto Larson Street and parked in front of the house. "I don't want to go there," she said, her voice trembling with tears. "Look, Larson's in jail right now. You have plenty of time to gather your things and leave." She stared at me for a moment before getting out of the car and heading to the apartment. Soon, she began hauling out trash bags filled with her clothes. She hadn't taken much when she left me, so she was done quickly. Afterward, we left. A few minutes later, she asked, "Where are we going?" Her voice was filled with apprehension. "We're going to your father's house," I told her. "You said you wanted to go home. You don't have another home." We drove in silence for a while. Her father lived far out in the suburbs. Linda broke the silence. "I didn't get a chance to apologize to you," she said. "I'm sorry for what I did. I was foolish and you caught me cheating. I admit that, but I never stopped loving you. I just forgot what that meant for a while. I didn't even want to stay with Eric, we didn't have much in common. I'm sorry for hurting you." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Could I have said, "It's okay"? Absolutely not. Could I tell her I forgave her? That would have been a lie, as I still resented how she had ruined our marriage. My silence, I believe, hurt her more than any grand speech could have. As we neared her father's house, Linda looked at me and asked, "What am I going to tell my father?" I was at a loss for words. What the hell? We've been divorced for months and you haven't told him? I just told him we were having trouble, Linda said. You're definitely in trouble now, I replied. Find a good reason, but don't make me the bad guy, or I'll tell him the whole truth. It was late, and I didn't offer to help Linda move her things into her father's house. For one, I was savoring her misery. For another, I didn't want to face Walter. The next day, I parked across the street from Larson's house. He got home just before noon. It was time to deliver the final blow to their affair. I grabbed the cheapest bottle of Chilean wine I had bought, a $10 investment, and headed up the stairs. Larson answered the door, surprised to see me. Hi, I said. We've never met, but I'm John Harris, Linda McKay's ex-husband. I handed him the bottle of wine. Here, take this. I'm not a freeloader. This replaces the other bottle of wine I emptied. I pulled a key from my pocket and handed it to him. Oh, and I won't be needing this either. Linda moved out last night. I smiled all the way to my car, feeling a spring in my step. Revenge can be so satisfying. I felt like I could finally move on after getting my revenge on that bitch.
Before the accident, my life was straightforward. I was like any other high school grad, excited for the future but unsure of where I was headed. I spent my days with friends, dreaming of success and adventure, though my goals were vague. My family was supportive but sometimes distant. That uncertainty weighed on me, but it was nothing compared to what came next. One day I was a young man fresh out of school. The next, everything changed. I don't remember much about the accident, but it left me in a coma for 2 years. When I woke up, I was covered in scars, confused, and had no memory of my life before. My family was gone, and I felt lost. Suddenly, I heard Zoe's voice cut through the chaos of my dream. "Roger, wake up, sweetheart. You're dreaming again." I had been dreaming of bees, just like always. After nearly 30 years together, Zoe still laughed when I told her it was the killer bees, a nod to an old Saturday Night Live skit. I took a shower to shake off the lingering effects. These dreams had haunted me since the accident at 18. Though I don't recall the accident, I know I was in a coma for 2 years. When I finally woke, I decided to go to college. Scarred but healed, I was ready to move forward, even though my family was nowhere to be found. The accident must have been serious. My body showed signs of extensive surgery. I wondered if I had enjoyed life before it happened because I certainly paid a high price. Afterward, I became cautious, preferring a quiet, simple life. I found myself drawn to accounting, a career I'd never imagined in high school. The doctors said it wasn't unusual to forget details. I just wanted a peaceful life, a loving family, a house with a pool, and a quiet routine. The bees, though, always returned in my dreams. "Got another fly swatter?" I asked in my dream. The bees were relentless, and every sting hurt more than the last. Then, Zoe's voice brought me back to reality again. "Roger, wake up. It's just a dream." "They're getting worse," I admitted, though my doctor insisted it was just an aversion to bees. Zoe and I married when I was 20 and she was 25 in a small church near my college. It was a quiet affair. Neither of us had much family. We settled down, living among her friends, and I continued school. By 1975, I had a degree in accounting and computer science, though it seemed to happen fast. I didn't question it, just started my career as an accountant, a simple job that suited my newfound preference for a quiet life. I often worked alone, counting inventory. If 2 of us counted together, we could agree on a number, even if it was wrong. But when counting separately, the audit would be accurate. It was boring, but I liked it. No one bothered me, and I could work at my own pace. "Bees again," I muttered. "Where are they coming from?" I waved my hand and felt them strike, even drawing blood. "Beekeeper, do something about these things." "Whoop?" "These are killer bees. Put something on the stings. What's that noise? A bird? No, it's too big. A pterodactyl?" Then it hit me. Damn, stung again. What kind of bird is this? Zoe's voice pulled me out of the dream. "Roger, wake up. You're having a bad dream. Go take a shower." The dreams were intense. My scars hurt, and the people in the dreams were like ghosts, faceless shapes. 2 years after John was born, we had Paula, my little princess. I loved John, but Paula had me wrapped around her finger, just like her mom. I adored my kids and Zoe. I loved watching them sleep, helping them walk, ride a bike, and play catch. Those moments were my happiest. We had neighborhood barbecues, and though everyone knew each other well, I was the newcomer. Maybe it was because I married Zoe quickly after she got pregnant. Our relationship was decent, but after marriage, our sex life faded. Zoe wasn't interested, so it became infrequent. But I had my kids and a calm life, which kept me content. I overheard the women talking once. "Zoe, how do you put up with boring Roger?" "Roger's perfect," Zoe replied. "He doesn't drink, smoke, or gamble. He loves me and the kids, and is a great provider." Zoe soon announced she was pregnant with Billy, and we celebrated with friends. Our kids grew up together with the neighborhood kids, and we were part of a tight-knit group. People teased me about being boring, but I didn't mind. I loved running, even though no one else joined me. My job auditing warehouses kept me in shape. Counting all those items required physical effort. At home, I used weights in the basement and kept up with the kids' activities, music lessons, sports, and more. Zoe stayed busy as a full-time mom, managing it all. Whop, whop. "Is that a pterodactyl?" I muttered. "These damn bees are everywhere. Beekeeper, get rid of them. People are getting stung and it's dangerous. Give them the bee sting serum, but don't touch me. I'll swat you." "Dragonflies? Where did they come from? At least they eat the bees." "Roger, wake up, honey. Go take a shower," Zoe said. I did as she asked, but my scars ached and I had a headache. "I hate bees," I told her. "I keep dreaming about prehistoric birds, snakes, and hogs. The dreams are getting crazier." "Why can't I remember the accident?" I asked the doctor while Zoe sat with me. "And these weird dreams?" "Your memory loss could be from post-traumatic stress," the doctor said. "As for the dreams, they might be linked to the accident." "Doctor, I don't know what kind of pterodactyl it was. I'm an accountant, not a paleontologist." The questions annoyed me. The dreams got worse, but life remained steady and dull, which I liked. I went to work, counted beans, and came home. Sex with Zoe became less frequent, but that didn't bother me much. "Doctor, now I'm dreaming about dancing, like in West Side Story," I told him. "It's not sexual, but I'm dancing with men, holding hands, ballroom style." "The bees are always there in the background," I added, "and sometimes there are snakes, hogs, and dragonflies, and we start skidding." The doctor didn't have answers. He asked Zoe if anything at home was unusual, but she said I was the same as always, except for the dreams. That was the last time I saw him. Life went on with the usual Saturday barbecues and neighborhood events. Our group was close-knit, about 20 people plus kids. We attended PTA meetings, saved for college, and dealt with weddings. I worked extra shifts when we needed money, and I was proud to provide for my family. The house was paid off, we had retirement accounts, and I even managed new cars and vacations. Zoe's friends would sometimes tease her. "How do you deal with being married to someone so boring?" "I entertain myself," Zoe would reply. "Roger's good to me, provides for us, and loves me and the kids. I'm happy, and you should be so lucky." As time passed, we approached our 30th anniversary. "The others have been stung. Beekeeper, help them. Where are all these bees coming from? Someone give me another fly swatter," I mumbled in another wild dream. It was just another bizarre night, but by now I was used to it. "Hey, Roger, still dancing with men while the bees sting you?" Randolph joked, making everyone laugh. I was surprised that Zoe had mentioned my dreams about dancing with men to anyone, especially her friends. That was supposed to stay between us. On the drive home, I pulled over to talk to her. "Zoe, why did you tell people something so personal? You've betrayed my trust," I said. Zoe just laughed. "Roger, these are our best friends. We see them every day, take vacations together, and share meals. Why are you being upset? You're the one dancing with other men," she said. That was the moment I realized others were more important to Zoe than I was. It made me suspicious, and I hated feeling that way. After a few months of paying closer attention, I found out the truth. One day I showed up at one of their gatherings uninvited. It was something I'd never done in 30 years, even though they often dropped by our house without notice. Inside, I found Zoe, our adult children, and all 20 of our so-called friends, unclothed and having sex. "Well, you found out," Robert said as everyone laughed. "Come in, Roger, and learn the truth about your boring life." Zoe introduced the men she had been with, pointing out that their middle names matched our children's first names. It confirmed what I already suspected. It turned out that many people, including our adult children, had been part of a secret group, but I was not aware of it. My children had long since stopped calling me Dad, and now I knew why. "Why, Zoe? Why did you steal 30 years of my life? What did I ever do to deserve this?" I asked. Zoe looked at me with exasperation. "Roger, you're just boring. You have no passion, no backbone. We were all part of a pact since childhood to stay together, to have sex with each other. You were just the extra man to keep the group even. We kept you in the dark because you liked it there. I couldn't risk you being the father of my kids. I needed better genes than yours." "Why didn't you want a real marriage with me?" I asked. "I wanted more sex, more connection, but you always shut me down." Zoe replied coldly, "If I gave you what you wanted, you'd figure out the truth. I couldn't take that chance. I picked you because I was already pregnant, and you were easy to manipulate. Sleep with you once, say you were the father, and it was done. You never stood a chance of figuring it out. Was that all I was to you? Just someone to give you money while you slept with your old friends and dragged our kids into this mess? Was everything you said to me, all the baby and honey, a lie?" I asked. "Don't be ridiculous, Roger. I sort of liked you. Calling you baby and honey was just being nice. But after years of those stupid dreams about dancing with men, you disgusted me. You're a freak, worrying about dragonflies, prehistoric birds, and bees. Now you know, but it's too late. If you divorce me, I'll get half of everything in alimony for life," Zoe said, smiling. "And your lovers, were they all in on this?" I demanded. "They're not just sex buddies, Roger. They're my lovers. We've loved each other since childhood, something you'll never understand," Zoe replied. Her friends chimed in, laughing. "You were the perfect fool, Roger. While you worked, we were screwing your wife and your kids. None of us would have touched you. You weren't worth it. We kept you around for your money and used you to raise our kids." Everyone joined in, showing their contempt for me. They had used my money and kept me in the dark for years. Now, with the truth out, they didn't bother hiding it anymore. "Be a good boy and clean the house. I'll be back in a few days," Zoe said as they all laughed. As I walked out, I turned to Zoe and said, "You betrayed me for this? You gave your children to people who treat you like garbage. You're proud of that? Did you ever notice your friends' kids aren't part of this? Think about why." I continued, "Your lover eliminated himself rather than marry someone pregnant by John. Didn't that clue you in? I'm just glad I'm not part of your gene pool." My hidden camera had recorded everything. "Come back any time, Roger," John Sr. said as I left. "Bring some friends. Oh, wait, you don't have any," he mocked. But I did have 6 county marshals waiting outside, ready to serve everyone with court papers. "They're all inside," I told the officers. The screams from 23 unclothed people as 6 marshals entered were deafening. I smiled as I walked away, unhurried. The restraining orders would keep them away while everything settled. The divorce was ugly, but I handled it in the county seat, not my hometown. I filed for an annulment based on fraud, and with the evidence from our talk, I hit Zoe's friends for millions. They admitted the whole conspiracy, how they used me to pay for everything while they carried on their affairs. With their confession, I secured the house, all our savings, retirement accounts, everything. Since it was fraud, there was no community property. Zoe and her friends owed me for raising their kids. The kids who had long stopped calling me Dad, hated me for what I did to their parents. I wasn't done. As a bean counter, I knew exactly how to get what I was owed. In the end, I got over $5 million from all involved. It didn't ruin them, but it put a serious dent in their finances. They even pooled their money to pay me off, especially after I started filing writs of attachment. I also had the birth certificates changed since they were based on fraud, and Zoe had to give up my last name. I didn't care what names the kids used. I lost contact with all of them and didn't want to live in the house, but I didn't want to sell it either. I wanted to destroy it. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, I returned to the neighborhood with a crew to demolish the house. Zoe and the kids went crazy. The house was worth $600,000, but I jacked up the price to $1.1 million, and all their Zex buddies bought it. Their Zex lives depended on owning that house because it connected to their properties. I made an extra $500,000 in just a few days of negotiating. Before leaving, I destroyed every trace of our life together. Photos, cards, school projects. I left the house filthy with rotten food and utilities shut off. I even painted every wall, ceiling, and window black. Zoe got the house, and it became their party house. She became the group's housekeeper, or more accurately, their personal strumpet, though she never saw it that way. She believed her kids were special because they were part of the group, but it was because they were foolish enough to believe her lies. I quit my job and left everything behind, including my clothes. I drove all night, stopped at a cheap motel, and the next day bought new clothes at Walmart. I changed rental cars and discarded everything that could remind me of those 30 wasted years. It was like stomping the dust from my feet. A clean break. 2 days later, I was in D.C., at the Pentagon, well, actually, an annex, filling out a job application. I gave them my days in address and a new cell number, having ditched the old one they had been using to track me. During my investigation, I discovered they were forwarding my calls, so I used that to stay ahead of them. The DoD hired me the next week. The interview was odd, but they needed a CPA and I had the credentials. When asked if I'd use veteran preference, I explained my coma and not serving in Vietnam. A Navy officer even took my fingerprints electronically. "Welcome to the Department of Defense, Mr. Phil," they said with a smile. "Where would you like to start?" I surprised myself by saying I wanted to go to Iraq or Afghanistan for some excitement. I was tired of my dull life and needed a change. A few days later, I was fitted with body armor I had to buy myself and sent to weapons training. Strange for a civilian auditor. But they insisted, saying, "We think you should." I wasn't Rambo, but I carried twin .45s, an M16A4, and an M9 bayonet. My first assignment was Afghanistan. When I heard the whop-whop of the helicopter's blades, it hit me. That was the sound from my dreams. It wasn't exactly the same, but close enough. I must have heard it before, even if I didn't remember. I still had the dreams, but now there was no deceitful wife pretending to care. I visited various bases, auditing assets, and quickly learned that alliances could be bought short-term. The enemy of my enemy was a friend, but only for the right price. The dreams continued. But now the smoke people took shape, with faint faces appearing. I was an old man among young soldiers, some barely 18, already with children of their own. To them, if you were 30, you were dad. 40 made you gramps. And over 50, you were just old man. These young soldiers moved with precision, like a deadly ballet, following orders without hesitation. It reminded me of Tiberius, whose drills were like bloodless battles, while his battles were bloody drills. I admired their discipline, but wondered how they'd feel later in life, having been forced to do such violent things. The dreams persisted, dragonflies, snakes, hogs, bees, but their intensity faded. Faces appeared on the smoke figures, young faces of people I didn't know. Meanwhile, I continued my work, counting everything from bullets and rockets to socks and water bottles. We had to plan ahead, ensuring we had what was needed for the future, always accounting for losses along the way. Planning was critical, as everything had to be stocked, shipped, and tracked. About 4 months in, we were ambushed. Bullets flew, sounding like bees buzzing overhead. Despite the chaos, I remained calm. The soldiers moved with precision, and I followed their lead, watching for flanking movements and calling for fire. Training kicked in, and we moved as one, the firefight. The firefight ended quickly, and the enemy retreated into the terrain. After that day, the dreams nearly stopped, replaced by the harsh reality of war. I moved to Iraq for the same job, counting supplies, reporting what was needed and what wasn't. The scale grew, with more items to track and more things to lose. I went on patrols, claiming I needed to assess assets, but really just wanting to escape the warehouse. Like a dancer moving to music, we moved to the rhythm of war. I stayed solitary, rarely spoke, but constantly observed, took notes, and filed reports. The DoD loves paperwork, now all computerized. I uploaded everything via satellite. There were distractions everywhere, even bees, just a few stings here and there. I let my superiors know. I had been there over 4 years, originally part of a team, then leading one, and eventually working solo. War became home, a distraction from the past 30 years. Despite firefights and wounds, none serious, I survived. I continued auditing supply depots, counting everything needed for military operations. All branches, Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, played their part in this deadly game. I didn't enjoy battle or taking lives, but the absence of dreams was a relief. I was well equipped, and nobody bothered me, not even high-ranking officers. I simply did my job, learned the area, and helped where needed. I had no real friends, just pseudo-friends, fellow Americans I would liquidate or die for. The mission was simple: break things, create widows, get home alive. Everything else was noise. When I entered a new depot, I knew I'd face the same routine. A sergeant major would give me grief, and I'd have to put them in their place. The script was always the same. Stay out of my way, let me do my job. Sergeant Major Claw was no different. "This is my house, my rules," she said, getting in my face. Nose to nose, it was a standoff, just like always. "Don't give me that," I replied. "This is my jurisdiction. I monitor everything here." She barked back, telling me not to touch anything without her permission. As she stormed off, I noted her sharp posture and appearance, pegging her as an American Indian. I left the area knowing I couldn't escalate the situation further. Instead, I joined a patrol, needing to escape the depot and get back to the battlefield. Sergeant Major Claw, her real name, Sergeant Major Jen Iclaw, was born with a strong grip, earning her the nickname Iron Claw from her grandfather. A full-blooded Northern Blackfoot, she was raised by her grandparents after her parents died mysteriously in a car crash. Her grandfather, a warrior with scars from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, taught her the old ways. Claw followed in his footsteps, becoming a warrior at 18, serving in Kosovo and Montenegro, and rising through the ranks without compromise. She earned a master's in warehouse management and took pride in her American Indian heritage. She was determined not to let anyone, especially a civilian like Roger, get the best of her. Meanwhile, Roger returned to the depot one evening and found Claw sleeping in full uniform, ready for battle, with her .45 by her side. Roger lied about securing the depot, knowing he was drawn to her, though their relationship remained tense. Claw, always on guard, was a force to be reckoned with. This depot, while not the largest, became Roger's base. He constantly inspected inventory, checked records, and ensured supplies were managed properly. His interactions with Claw were confrontational, but no duels were allowed. If there were, he knew she'd win. Despite their friction, Roger respected her. Sergeant Major Claw was equally frustrated with Roger. To her, he was a civilian playing soldier, a potential liability. Despite her efforts to get him off patrols, Roger seemed untouchable. He even earned respect from the SEALs. Claw couldn't figure out why, but she kept trying. War, bees, firefights, and strange dreams surrounded them both, making their battlefield rivalry even more intense. Sergeant Major Claw, I was raised by my grandparents after my parents' end of lives, and my life has always been the Army. I've searched for a warrior like my grandmother found in my grandfather, but at 45, I've accepted I won't find him and children won't come. Grandfather, a warrior with scars from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, always said I'd have children, but now that seems impossible. Recently, my dreams have been filled with Roger. I see him differently now. He's scarred, not from a car accident, but from battles, the kind of scars only a warrior bears. One night I watched him shower, cleaning his hands as if trying to wash away invisible blood. He saw me watching, and though I felt fear, I realized he trusted me. It wasn't romantic love, it was something deeper. He was my warrior. Meanwhile, Roger, Claw looked at me, and I told her everything about my past, my dead marriage, my wife's infidelities, and my 3 kids who weren't mine. I hadn't felt anything for years, but meeting Claw changed that. She smiled and said, "Then you're ready." There was love and playfulness in her eyes, something I never saw with my ex. She called me her gray-haired war stallion and invited me to make love to her. Her battle scars and age didn't matter to me. She was perfect. We kissed, and I felt her passion, hoping she saw the same love in my eyes. "I love you," I told her. "And if you ever stop, I'll scalp you for real," she replied. This was the connection I had longed for my entire life. Later, Claw asked if she could tell her grandfather about my dreams, explaining he understood dreams better than anyone. It was the first time someone asked for permission to share my dreams rather than just doing it. I agreed, trusting her completely. Sergeant Major Claw, yes. If my grandfather can help with the dreams, good. I don't have them as much anymore, but I'd like to know their meaning. I asked him, what do they mean? And what about his scars? They didn't come from a car accident. Grandfather said, his spirit is troubled, but you're helping him. He's the warrior you've been searching for. He found you without knowing it. Everything will happen as it's meant to. Don't worry. I joked, sometimes your mystic stuff drives me crazy, but you're always right. Grandfather laughed, and I told grandmother the good news. Grandmother said, I heard it all. You'll make me a great-grandmother soon, and don't keep the kids too far from us. Roger. The conversation with Claw's grandparents went on, as such things do. Claw and I were lovers, and she admired my scars, calling them beautiful. She didn't care about my past. She wanted me as I was. We worked hard, but always found time for each other, even in a war zone. 3 months into our relationship, we knew everything about each other. She loved my scars, kissing them tenderly. Sergeant Major Jin Eyeclaw was the love of my life. Then, everything changed. Early one morning, I was inside the depot when fire shot erupted. I rushed outside to see a chopper going down, likely shot by insurgents. There were over 100 attacking us. I saw Claw running toward the chopper, firing her .45. She reloaded and kept going, straight into the chaos. I ran after her, shooting as many as I could. We were caught off guard during a vulnerable moment, but I only cared about Jin. I saw Claw fall after being hit by a bullet that knocked her down. I reached her within seconds. She was alive, but hurt. Her vest had slowed the bullet. I handed her one of my .45s and extra magazines, telling her, "Liquidate anything that comes over that berm, even if you think it's me." I charged at the enemy, firing until I ran out of ammo. My only thought was saving Jin. Reinforcements were coming, but one enemy got close enough to shoot me. Fueled by anger, I kept going. When I was out of ammo, I pulled my M9 and engaged him in hand-to-hand combat. He was carrying a dangerous device. I grabbed his right hand to prevent him from setting off the device. I hoped I could keep it from exploding, and I was lucky it didn't. The men from the helicopter got closer, but my enemy tried to escape. I knew this fight well. With my left hand gripping his right, I guided him to his end of life. I had to stop him to prevent harm to others. His eyes widened as he realized he was dying, but he was ready for it. As he died, I lifted him with the knife still in his skull, and we fell near a trench. I released his body into the trench as an explosion rocked the area, causing me to lose consciousness. "Whop, whop, whop! Where are the damn bees coming from?" I shouted, trying to regain control. "We're under attack from every side! Fly swatter, I need more ammo!" I barked, catching a bandolier someone threw. "Johnson Roberts, you're with me! Suppressing fire on the left," I ordered. "Williams, stay put and fire at anything on the right. Hit the tree line." I gave quiet instructions. "Johnson Roberts, blades only, no prisoners, be fast and silent." Bullets flew everywhere like angry bees, and I heard Johnson joke with Roberts, laughing despite the chaos. "Quit laughing, Johnson, or you'll get eliminated," I warned. The sound of cobras firing filled the air. "Cover your necks, that brass is hot," I shouted. "Slicks inbound, get ready to move." Wilson grabbed Johnson, yelling, "Don't die on me, Johnson. I'll find you in hell and kick your back if you do." "Medic! Over here! Help Johnson!" I shouted as the battle raged. "Hit the tree lines with a grenade launcher. Move toward the LZ, drag anyone you can, no one gets left behind," I ordered, grabbing enemy AKs along the way to blend in. "Watch the smoke, Charlie can see it just like the cobras can," I warned, ensuring everyone stayed low. "Medic, move it!" I called again, glancing at the wounded. I turned to Ulti. "You'll be the last one out, I promise." "Time to dance," I whispered, calming her. "I've got you, don't worry about the bees." Reassuring her, I added, "Your first battle and you didn't lose a single man. You'll have to learn to write those letters, but not today." Choppers roared overhead. "Dragonflies inbound, stay low," I said as the battle continued. A voice called out, "How did you guys get caught here?" I murmured to myself, "Stay with me, Light," as I glanced at the wounded. "The chief is down, but not out." Turning to the medic, I warned, "Save the lieutenant or I'll put a bullet in you." The situation was chaotic, with fire shot, explosions, and helicopters everywhere. I knelt by Ulti. "Stay with me. Come back. I want it all," I whispered, my voice shaky. Suddenly, I wondered, who said that? My mind was spinning. I woke up in a bright room, disoriented. Jen was there. "Hi, Jen," I said. "I remember everything. Snakes, hogs, bees. Did I do all this before?" "Yes, maybe you did," she replied with a smile. "You're my brave warhorse." I noticed a ring on her finger. "Are you married? How long have I been out?" "A little over a year," she said. "And yes, I'm married. To you." An officer entered. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, I think," I replied. "Have we done this before?" "Yes," the officer confirmed. "You've been in and out for a year, but you're healed now." I then heard babies crying. Jen picked up 2 infants, cradling them in her arms. "How old?" I asked. 3 months, she said. "This is Roger Jr., and this is Edna. They're ours. I didn't think I could have kids anymore, but here we are. And I'm married to you. Forever." She handed me the babies, and I felt nothing but love. Questions could wait. I just wanted to hold my family. Jen added, "I did DNA tests for you." "I don't need them," I said. "I already know." I noticed a simple gold band on my hand. How did we get married? I wondered, but I didn't ask. It didn't matter. 6 months later, we were at Zoe's house. The original 23 members were there, including her kids. The big screen flashed with news. Command Sergeant Major Roger Phil was to receive the Medal of Honor. The room went quiet. "They can't mean our Roger Phil," John Sr. grumbled, annoyed that someone outshined him. Then a picture of me in uniform appeared, smiling, medals on my chest, with Jen and our children. The announcer introduced retired General Hannigan and Admiral Wilson, saying they served with me in Vietnam. "Vietnam?" Zoe gasped. "Roger was in Vietnam?" The announcer asked the officers to share their stories about me, leaving the group in stunned silence. General Hannigan shared, "I served with then Sergeant Phil during my time as a second lieutenant in Vietnam. Phil was on his second tour and acting platoon sergeant, though he wasn't officially promoted to staff sergeant until a few days later. He always had a book with him, studying to become an accountant through Army classes. Things got rough quickly. Congress was cutting funding, so we had small platoons. Mine had 18 men, and we were part of a long-range reconnaissance patrol, LRP. We got ambushed deep in the jungle by the NVA, who were probably tipped off about our location. The firefight lasted over an hour. I was shot, and Phil took command. He ordered one of our men to use the M79 grenade launcher, but it only made things worse. The NVA kept coming like a disturbed beehive. We ran low on ammo, and Phil went hand-to-hand with several enemies, liquidating 3 of them with his knife. His main goal was to get us out alive, and he was deadly with a blade. Despite being wounded, Phil kept going. His humor helped break the tension, even in the middle of battle. We finally got support from A-37 jets, known as Dragonflies, and then Cobras, helicopters with miniguns that can fire 8,000 rounds a minute. The firepower gave us enough time to evacuate by Huey helicopters, or Slicks. Phil helped get the men to safety, even grabbing enemy AK-47S to return fire and fend off the NVA as we left. General Hannigan recalled, "Phil kept fighting until everyone else was on the helicopter. He was striking twice, but provided enough cover to slow the enemy. The Cobras couldn't help because the enemy was too close. Then Phil came for me, lifting me by my web gear, even though he was wounded too. I was bleeding out, barely able to hold on to him. Phil was only 5 9 inches and about 125 pounds, but he carried me to the slick. He made sure all the men were accounted for before tossing me on board, telling me, 'Now you can say you were the last man on the field.' That was Phil, always putting his men first. I recommended him for the Medal of Honor, but he received the Silver Star instead. He saved all our lives that day. I tried to thank him later, but he was back in the field. His wounds weren't serious enough to send him home, not that he wanted to leave. Phil had the look, that distant, focused stare some men get when they're ready for battle. He never lost it, always in warrior mode. Now, 30 years later, I see it's gone when he looks at his wife and kids. It's good to see him finally happy. Zoe and her group sat in shocked silence watching the TV. The announcer turned to Admiral Wilson. "Admiral, you also served with Sergeant Major Phil. What can you tell us?" Admiral Wilson nodded. "My experience with Phil was similar to the general's. I was leading a SEAL team that wasn't supposed to be there after 1971, but we were still around as advisors. Our area overlapped with Phil's patrols. We joked about him being an Army puke, and he'd return the favor. But when things got tough, Phil always showed up. During one fight, we were ambushed and flanked. Phil arrived and acted like an entire company was backing him up. His presence alone turned the tide, and he moved quickly to stop the flanking. His speed and aggression scared the enemy. They thought they were up against far more men. We were all shot up, bullets flying everywhere. Phil kept talking about the bees swarming. He had a way of making jokes during combat to keep everyone focused, though he was dead serious. His humor helped us get through the worst moments and stay alive." Admiral Wilson continued. "It was similar to what the general said. When the Slicks arrived, Phil insisted that the medic prioritize helping others, making it clear he wanted them treated first. We were lucky to be near the 1st Cavalry, who came fully armed to help us out. Phil was shot up pretty badly, but still dragged me to the Slick, putting his body between me and the enemy, just like he did for the general. He made sure I was the last one off the field, knowing how important that is for an officer. Phil told me he was tired and just wanted to go home, fall in love, and live a boring life. He said he wanted to forget the Army, Vietnam, and everything that had happened. A few months later, we crossed paths again at the Pentagon. I had recommended him for the Medal of Honor, but he received the Navy Cross instead. He didn't seem happy, even though it's just one step below the Medal of Honor. He only smiled for the photo. After the ceremony, Phil quietly left the military. Before he left, I gave him my Navy SEAL badge. He didn't say much, just nodded, and then disappeared. Later, I saw him at a bus stop by the Pentagon dressed in civilian clothes. I offered him a ride, and he acted like we were strangers. I asked him where he was headed, and he said he was going out west to college but gave no details. At the Greyhound station, I handed him a box full of his awards and decorations, but he acted like he didn't recognize it. He even claimed he'd never been in the military, saying he'd been in a coma after an accident. He shrugged and walked away with the box. It held his Navy Cross, silver stars, Purple Hearts, and more. Phil had told me he wanted to forget everything, and this was his way of doing it. That was the last time I saw him, until now. Zoe's children sat in stunned silence. John Jr. remembered, "I saw that box once years ago. Dad said it wasn't important and took me to play catch. When I looked for it again, it was gone." John Jr. went downstairs to look for the box. It didn't occur to him that he had said Dad instead of Roger. He returned with the box just as the president had finished presenting Roger with his second Medal of Honor. No one since Pappy Boyington had been awarded the Medal of Honor twice. The first time Pappy received it, it was posthumously along with a Navy Cross. The second time, President Truman awarded it to him after he was found alive, having spent 20 months in a Japanese POW camp. Everyone thought he was dead, so he received the first one as a deceased man. Pappy always found it amusing. He had come back from the dead to receive it again. The president recounted how he was on an unscheduled secret visit to the troops in a helicopter, which was part of a larger public trip to a nearby country, when a lucky shot disabled the engine. The helicopter went down, and before his Marines and other helicopters could reach them, they came under attack. He and his advisors, along with Secret Service agents, ran toward a set of buildings as the helicopter became the focal point of the attack. There was nothing to indicate it was the president's helicopter, but the attackers, seeing the Secret Service detail around him, suspected he was someone important. "As we were running for cover," the president said, "we saw Command Sergeant Major Phil charging the enemy, initially all by himself. Then I noticed a wounded soldier, and Phil paused for a moment, gave that soldier something, and then sprinted toward the enemy. Phil's shots were deadly accurate, almost everyone hitting its mark. This gave the other American soldiers time to regroup and launch their own attack. When Phil ran out of ammunition, he attacked a man with just a knife. Even from a distance, it was obvious the man was a walking bomb, based on the way his clothes moved and something strapped to his chest. Without concern for his own safety and thinking only of others, Phil grabbed the detonator from the man's right hand with his left and liquidated him with the knife. He then carried the body to a trench, where the explosion did minimal damage. The attackers tried to shoot Phil multiple times, hoping he would drop the body and trigger the bomb. Phil was hit several times, but refused to stop until everyone was safe." The president went on. "But that wasn't all Phil did. When we finally reached him, he made a request. The soldier he had helped was now a sergeant major herself, but back then she was Corporal Claw. He asked to marry her before he died and requested that I reinstate him into the Army so she would receive survivor benefits. Fair is fair, he said. I reinstated him as a command sergeant major and performed the quickest wedding ceremony in history. I asked, "Do you take?" Twice, and after 2 yes responses, they were married, by the President of the United States, no less. Now I see that, based on the maternity uniform Sergeant Major Jin Phil is wearing, we're expecting 2 more little Phils. That makes 4. Men like Command Sergeant Major Phil answer the call when their country needs them and then return to normal life without mentioning their heroism. That's the backbone of America. We are proud to have him serve with us and for us. This time, we're not letting him go. We're keeping him in the Army. He is home." The president looked at the crowd. In the audience today are his wife's grandparents, one of whom many of you know, Master Sergeant Strongbear, himself a Medal of Honor recipient. Would you please stand so we can honor you? Master Sergeant Strongbear, the man Roger would come to think of as his father-in-law, stood and received the crowd's recognition. It had only been a month since Roger had rejoined the world when he and his wife, along with their children, traveled to Montana to meet her relatives on the reservation. While on medical leave, Roger and his wife participated in a traditional Blackfoot marriage ceremony. Just 4 months after giving birth, she became pregnant again. Their children were welcomed into the Blackfoot Nation. Jean Claw was proud of the pregnancy. She was a Blackfoot bride, a Blackfoot mother, and the wife of a warrior whose battle scars earned him the respect of her tribe. To her, every scar was a beautiful reminder of her husband's bravery and that her gray stallion was hers forever. During this time, she had a conversation with Roger. "Roger, my love," she said, "I'm worried about being pregnant again. I can't stop making love to you, but I'm afraid that if we keep going, I'll keep getting pregnant. Maybe I should get fixed so it doesn't happen again." Ironclaw laughed and replied, "Husband, would you have me married to a gelding instead of a stallion? We will not stop making love, and I will have as many children as the spirit allows. I have a warrior for a husband, and I want the world to see that he is a warrior at home just like he is away." And that was the end of the conversation. They would have no more children after their second set of twins, another boy and girl. They too would become members of the Blackfoot Nation. This set would be born on the reservation, and Roger was there for their birth, cutting the cords and breathing life into them. Besides their mother, Roger was the first person they touched. Roger was a devoted father and husband. For the next 10 years, the family traveled the world as part of a military mission. Because of Roger's dedication to his country and his courage in combat, he and his wife were always stationed together. Though they had different roles, they both retired on the same day. Roger was never allowed back into a war zone, despite his repeated efforts to be assigned there. The Department of Defense considered him a national treasure. Their children grew up on military bases worldwide, and when the time came, 2 of them went to West Point and 2 to Annapolis, all 4 through presidential appointments. In the present, the president concluded, "Command Sergeant Major Phil, I'd like to point out that a sergeant major is a leader, not a commander, Sergeant Major. Your wife outranks you, so you better follow her orders." The audience laughed and applauded as the formal ceremony wrapped up, with the president and first lady greeting many of the attendees. It was both a political event and a tribute to Command Sergeant Major Phil. While the mood was light, something more serious was happening elsewhere. John Jr. opened the box and found Roger's dog tags, along with medals, ribbons, and several citations. They spread them out on a large table to inspect. Among them were the Navy Cross and the Silver Star, but they weren't the only ones. There were also multiple Bronze Stars with small V devices, indicating they were awarded for valor in combat. There were Army, Navy, and even Air Force commendation medals, all with V devices attached. It wasn't unheard of for a service member to receive medals from different branches for acts performed in service to those branches. Although it was rare, several Purple Hearts were also in the collection. Normally, receiving 3 would mean you had to leave the combat zone, but Roger had 6. Some were earned while working with Navy personnel, others during an Air Force base defense. Because of this, they weren't all recorded in his official file. No one knew how many times he had truly been wounded. That explained his many scars, some from bullets, some from explosions, and others from hand-to-hand combat. For reasons unknown, Roger often claimed they were from a car accident instead of telling the truth. Perhaps he didn't fully remember, or maybe his dreams served as a way to relive the horrors of battle. We'll never know for sure. There was also a Good Conduct Medal, a combat infantryman's badge, and a gold badge featuring an anchor, eagle, trident, and pistol, the Navy SEAL insignia. There were no orders accompanying this last badge, but it was clear that an admiral had given it to Roger on his final day. Additionally, there were several medals from the Republic of Vietnam, each accompanied by a citation and the paperwork that led to the recommendation for the award. The general and admiral had it wrong. The paperwork showed Roger had accomplished far more than they knew. Testimonials from other team members during his missions, including the Silver Star and Navy Cross operations, revealed just how much he had truly done. While the general and admiral had seen one side, his fellow soldiers saw much more. By now, everyone around the table was reading one of the documents or inspecting the medals. John Jr. glanced at Zoe and then at the overweight man, who had been frequently with his young wife, asking, "This is the man you thought had better genes than Roger?" The last item in the box was at the bottom, a sealed envelope addressed to my children. John Jr. opened it and read the letter aloud, written by a 20-year-old Roger to his future children. "My dear children, I hope I have children. I'm writing this on the eve of leaving the Army. I've done things a civilized man shouldn't do, and just because it was war doesn't make it right. These were things I had to do, but they still hurt me inside. Being young doesn't make them right, but from now on, I'll try to do what is right. It's never too late to try. I want to leave it all behind and do my best to forget, while atoning for it too. But before I do, I want to leave you with some words I hope to live by, and I hope they'll mean something to you. A person's value isn't found in a box, or in words written on a piece of paper, or in things to wear to show what you've done. It's in how you live your life every day. It's in how you treat your friends and even strangers, but most importantly, how you treat your family. It's how you show them love and devotion by always putting them first, no matter the cost. The best part is they love you for being who you are, regardless of how much money you make or how smart you are. Because of that, every day you must do your best for them, and they will do the same for you. That's the true measure of a person. I hope I've lived up to that for you. May God bless and keep you, and may He forgive me for what I've done in war. I hope He'll never need to forgive you because you'll live a good, just, and moral life as a good human being, a loving parent, and a faithful spouse. Your loving father, Roger. John and his half-sisters were in tears by the time the letter was finished. I'm done here. Who's coming with me? John asked, as he carefully gathered all the papers and documents, placing them back in the box, exactly as they had been. His sisters stood up and walked out with him. His wife stayed behind. 3 days later, a package arrived at the Pentagon, addressed to Command Sergeant Major Phil. Inside the outer package was a brown box tied with twine. It was delivered, unopened, to Command Sergeant Major Phil. Inside were the original items, and a short typed note found in an envelope beneath the twine, but not inside the box. This isn't meant for us. We wish it were, but it's not. The note wasn't signed, but Roger Phil knew exactly who had sent it. 4 months later, John was single, and he, Paula, and Billy had new names. We can do better, be better this time. We can be what Dad wanted, like he showed us, John told his sisters as they slowly walked away together. Meanwhile, Roger reflected, it was a few months after I got my original awards back when I showed Strongbear the letter. We were all sitting around the fire on a warm summer evening. There must have been 50 or more of us. It was a communal meal, and everyone was there to enjoy the night. Jean Claw was there, as beautiful as ever with our children. I loved calling her that. She was due soon, and her pride in me was clear, as was her grandmother's pride in Strongbear. My love for her was evident in her pregnancy and our children. I handed Strongbear the letter I'd written as a young man to my future children. He read it, smiled, and passed it around. I was a bit shocked that such a personal letter was being shared without my permission, but I was even more surprised when it came back to him, and he threw it into the fire. Words on paper mean nothing. You wrote that. Show your children through your actions. Show them by how you live your life. You already know that. He was right, of course. He was always right, as I'd come to learn. And for the next 30 years, Jean Claw and I lived by those words. As for Zoe, in case you're wondering, she didn't live long after everything came to light. About a year later, someone sent her videos of her lovers talking about her, revealing what they really thought. They treated her as nothing more than an object for Zex, something to use and discard. They bragged about how they manipulated her into having children and then misused them. They had been using her and her children for years. The videos were also posted online, and copies were sent to all her neighbors. Zoe took her own life. When she was found, she was holding a picture of herself, Roger, and the children at an amusement park. Everyone was smiling and laughing, looking happy. No one knows where she got the picture, who took it, or why she kept it, but it was buried with her. Only 2 people quietly followed the casket to the gravesite after the service. They were the only attendees. The guest book simply listed them as Gray Stallion and Iron Claw. A few weeks later, several videos surfaced online showing the group involved in inappropriate behavior. These actions eventually became public, leading to serious consequences for everyone involved. The group had been filming for years, and now the footage was public. Each video ended with the men mocking Zoe as their stupid strumpet, followed by an image of her body and the autopsy report, which confirmed her end of life as self-destruction by poison. The group disbanded. They were shunned in their own community, with many moving away while others became reclusive for the rest of their lives. Somehow the videos seemed to follow them wherever they went. No one knows who posted them or sent them to their new neighbors, but the group's pursuit of selfish pleasure had destroyed many innocent lives.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Hi, I am Kevin Wallace, 38, a successful stock trader, a very successful writer of American Western frontier novels, and an occasional inventor. I have been divorced from Laura, 35, for 3 years now, and I still do not understand the disrespect. Sometimes troubles in relationships are not talked about, but there are often clues. I met Laura Graham at my youngest sister's wedding. Laura was the sister of one of the groomsmen. Laura somehow latched onto me even though I had duties as a stand-in for my father. My parents had died in a fire in a hotel in Aruba while on a second honeymoon. The hotel was owned by a U.S. company, and the place was a fire trap. I was left in charge of my two younger sisters, Natalie and Leanne. Natalie was 13, and Leanne was 15. I was 19 at the time and living at home while attending a local college. We had gotten great legal advice from my father's business attorney, so we took the hotel company to court and promised a strong media blitz if they decided to play hardball. I had been named executor of the estate, which included the business that my dad had built. The business had major insurance policies on Mom and Dad as they were partners in the business. The settlement, the insurance, and the sale of the business ensured that the three of us would each be multimillionaires when we reached 21. The money also did other things such as pay off the small mortgage on the family home and buy cars for each of us. Each car was in the name of the individual trust. We had the home ownership papers changed to make our trusts equal owners in the house and land. I had the lawyers put all the rest of the money after paying all the bills into equal trust funds for each of us, and for the trust to provide income, but not a complete payout until 25. Then the trust would match the income of the beneficiary. I did not want my sisters to fall prey to gold diggers. The trusts paid for all educational expenses through post-grad work in college if the girls wanted it. They did and used it wisely. I had a full-ride scholarship separate from the trust that was structured to give me a reasonable stipend, and so my trust just was sitting there until I turned 21. I was attending the university in town, so I was at home when needed. Leanne was, and is a genius, and graduated from high school at 16, got a bachelor's at 19, and an MBA at 20. Natalie is no slouch in the brains department either. She waited until she was 17 to graduate high school. Then she proceeded to blow through college and graduated at 20 with 2 bachelor's and a master's. She got her doctorate in chemistry at 22 and immediately was given a teaching position at a nearby university. She is now a full professor and the head of the chemistry department. She also has 3 chemistry textbooks to her credit. Leanne met a great guy, Brian Donovan, and they married and have a couple of kids and a thriving accounting agency. Brian is a CPA, and Leanne is his CEO. It was at a then 22-year-old Natalie's wedding to Professor James Lawton, MA, PhD, and a major egotist, general gold digger and total waste of space that I was supervising. She loved him, but I made sure she had an ironclad prenup. James just about had a stroke when he found out he could not get her money, but he did sign the prenup. I think he thought he would be able to get around the structures of the trust and the prenup. I told you, an egotistical a-hole. As I was a trustee for the 2 girls' trusts, it wasn't going to happen. It was while at the reception where I met Laura. I was greeting people as they were coming into the reception hall. She was a striking black-haired, brown-eyed beauty. She was also gracious and charming. After she found a seat, she joined me at the door. She volunteered to assist me in identifying assholes' friends and relatives. She stayed by my side all night whenever I was away from the head table. It would have been funny if I didn't enjoy it so much. I felt a connection right away. After the dinner, the dancing started and other the dances with my sisters. I danced with Laura every dance I was on the floor. When we weren't dancing, we were sitting together talking. She was a newly minted high school teacher. She taught AP English and creative writing. She was also a successful writer of several romance novels. She also knew of my writings. She offhandedly said, "I'm impressed that a finance guy could be such a good writer." That comment got me a little bit out of shape with how she said that, and so I harshly said, "I'm sorry you think finance people wouldn't have the ability of imagination to be a writer of fiction. I will match my book sales to yours any day of the week. I also have an offer for a movie adaptation for 3 of my novels and an offer for another movie if I expand one of my novellas. Perhaps romance novels will work out as well for you." Then I got up and went into the men's room to escape her until I could calm down. She was standing outside the restroom door when I came out. She was tearfully apologetic and said that she hadn't said what she wanted to say in the right way. I apologized for getting angry and said, "Let's just say that we are pleased with each other's writing success." "Okay, but I really am sorry for sounding like an egotistical snob. I already knew about your books. We have the same agent, and my publisher throws your numbers in my face to get me to write more salacious parts into my books. When I tell him that not my style, he gets upset. But my royalty checks keep coming in, and he always offers a new contract when I fulfill the current one. I'll talk to Jason Trent, our agent, and when you finish your next contract, you should have him put it out to other houses for bid." That is what I did when my last publisher's rep started to denigrate my writing. The publisher called and asked why I was shopping for a new publisher, so I told him. "I got a new rep, a bigger cut, and all of the copyrights and movies rights." I added, "I make a lot more per book, And now that I have the publisher's support, I am writing more. Do you think it will work? I have one more book to complete this contract. Let's talk to Jason together, and then we will know. Believe me, Jason knows how to work the system to get his clients more money, because the mercenary side of him loves to make himself more money. With that, we both laughed. The conversation went on to other things, then came back to writing. She told me she loved her classes and had some very gifted students that would be great writers if she could get them focused on writing. When I said, maybe writing is not their passion. I love finance, enjoy it when I tinker with some ideas for inventions, but writing is my passion. You just said you love teaching. Do you write as a sideline, like my financial work and tinkering is for me? Or do you teach as a sideline for your writing? It was as if a light went on. I haven't explained that to my kids. That's a great insight. I need to convey to them that work is great, but that writing is also important, and if they have the passion for writing, they will find the time to do it. Thank you. Then she excitedly grabbed me and kissed me. Then she blushed the brightest red that I had ever seen a human turn. We exchanged phone information and agreed to meet with Jason ASAP. She left, and I stayed and supervised the cleanup. The next Monday, I called Jason and told him about my conversation with Laura Graham. He laughed and said, I recently got a call from her publisher's rep. He wants to reduce her per-book royalty and require more books and different, more mature content. I told him that I would recommend that she change publishers. He was not pleased. I will call Laura and see if we three can't work out a strategy to get her the same deal you got. She has slightly more books published, and her per-book sales are very close to yours, but right now, her royalty setup is only about 60% of what you get, and she does not own the copyrights. Thanks, Jason. Call her and set it up. I will live with whatever time and day you set up. Dinner will be my treat. I hate to see anyone being steamrollered by the publishers. With that, we ended our conversation. I called Laura that evening and told her of my conversation. She told me that she had a conversation with Jason. She also told me that they had agreed to meet at the Outback the following Wednesday at 6 p.m. I agreed to be there. I told Laura with a slight smirk in my voice, I know it's just an excuse to see me again. Well, for your information, I planned it so we would meet, and you would see my good side. I heard an almost musical laugh and a you wish. Another laugh and an almost whispered, see you Wednesday, you wonderful goof. The meeting went very well, and Jason started the bidding wars. It ended just as I had told Laura. She stayed with her publisher, got a different, more respectful rep, more money per book, and all of her copyrights, including movie rights. All of these changes almost doubled her writing income. Laura and I dated for many months, and after almost a year, I asked her to marry me. She said yes. We planned a spring wedding, so we had 9 months from the engagement to plan the wedding. As we were both financially well off, we had a prenup that protected both of our personal incomes. The only penalty clause was that Laura insisted on a $1 million payout to the injured party if the divorce was granted because of adultery. The guilty party would also pay all legal fees involved in the divorce. My family home was specifically exempted and protected. I had my trust buy out my sister's shares. I gave their trusts the money, much to Leanne's and Natalie's approval and Mr. Lawton's disapproval. Laura was on board with living in the family home, even though it was much more than 2 people needed. We got married the week of Easter, which matched her school's spring break. We went on a hiking tour of the Appalachian Trail for 4 days. After that, we returned and enjoyed a relaxing few days before the school session started back up. Things were great for the first 2 years. Then Laura and I decided to try to have children. Nothing seemed to work. Basal temp, strict calendar planning, nothing. But I did enjoy a lot of sex. After 9 months of trying, Laura was getting desperate. She started to make a lot of snide and hurtful comments about how I wasn't man enough to get her pregnant. She threatened to find someone who could. She convinced me to go with her to a fertility doctor. It turns out I am sterile. I had the mumps when I was 15, and the doctor thought that that was probably the cause. Laura was devastated. It was so bad, and she was so bitchy that I told her I would agree to an annulment. Wrong move. I have never seen her so pissed. She went batshit crazy and started screaming obscenities at me and made a move like she was going to slap me. Then she accused me of wanting me to get rid of her. Her final rant was she was going to find someone who was a whole man and I could eat shit and die, and then she called me an a-hole. That pissed me off, but as I looked back I saw the annulment was a stupid statement, but it did not deserve her blow-up. Tuesday, I decided that cowardice was the best option. So I packed a few days' worth of clothes while she was at school and wrote her a note telling her why I was going. Laura, my love, you have been disrespecting me for several months. Then your last words of your latest rant were eat shit and die. A hole? Well, I won't be dying just yet, but I am leaving. It need not be permanent, but I will not be yelled at and cussed out for trying to ease your hurt. I do not want to lose you, but I know how much you want to have children. My suggestion of an annulment was so you could meet someone to father children with you. It may have been stupid, but it was not a sign that I don't love you. I will be out of contact while I am gone. I will check my email account and my voicemail on my cell at least once a day. If you want me back, let me know that way. If I don't hear from you by the weekend, Monday while you are in school, I will get the rest of my stuff, and we'll start divorce proceedings. If we divorce, you may stay in the house until the end of the school year. Because the trust owns the house, you will have to leave after the school year ends. As the reason for the divorce will not be adultery, we will enforce the prenup, but there will be no penalties. I know this sounds harsh, but I meant what I said when I suggested annulment. It was not to get rid of you, but to give you a chance to have children. I know it is not the same, but we might think about adoption. I love you with all my heart and only want you to be happy. Your loving husband, Kevin. I called Natalie and asked if I could spend a couple of days with her and James. She told me I was welcome, but James was not. She told me she would explain when I got there, and that she wanted the whole story. It was a 2-hour drive to her house. When I arrived, I got a strong hug and a tearful kiss. Natalie was a mess. She looked like a bag lady. She was in a ratty bathrobe and had an old sweatsuit underneath. She sobbed and blubbered so badly that I could not understand her. She was still my little sister, so I picked her up and took her into her house. I put her to bed with a strong shot of vodka and waited for her to go to sleep. I knew where everything was because I had been there a few times before, and James was an anal-retentive neat freak who was so organized that I would bet he knew how many sheets of toilet paper were left on each bathroom's roll. Natalie slept for a couple of hours. Meanwhile, I commandeered the guest room and put my stuff away. When she woke up, she told me about what was going on with James. It seems he was really pissed that he couldn't get her money. He bided his time, and when he saw his chance, he emptied their bank accounts and took off. He had been gone for a week when I called. I told Natalie that I would release some of her trust to replace the money if she needed it. She just laughed. You were right about the a-hole. All that was in the accounts was the last paychecks for each of us. I had sensed something going on, so I took out all but the minimum to keep the accounts open. He didn't notice, but he did wait until the paychecks would be in there. He got less than $5,000. I put the money in a safe I bought and put in my underwear drawer, a place where James would be afraid to go. I ended up with all of the money except about 10% of the savings. He tried to raid the trust, but you have that set up well. He got very frustrated, and that must have been when he planned to take off. He also said I was lousy on the voicemail message that he left me. Then she started to sniffle again. I held her and she calmed down. Once she was calm, she wanted to know what was going on with me. I told her the entire sorry story. As I was telling it, it sounded like a lame fairy tale, but I was hurt by Laura's rant. Natalie looked at me and said, Kevin Lee Wallace, I knew I was in trouble when she used my full name. You are such a stupid man at times. I'm sure Laura wanted your child, not just any child. Then she piled on. I thought that I was stupid about James, but you hurt a woman who loves you. She got mad because your suggestion seemed to indicate that you did not want her anymore. You go to bed tonight and think about that. I'm going to call her after supper and talk to her. If you were right, she won't care where you are, but I will bet you she wants you home tomorrow. We ate, and I turned my phone on, and there were no messages. I fired up my laptop and checked my email. No messages. I went to sleep. I had several very bad dreams. It was not a restful night. Over morning coffee, Natalie told me she talked to Laura. Laura was pissed and said I could stay away until hell freezes over. Then she would bring a blowtorch. You, my dear loving brother, are in deep shit with your wife. You need to do some major but kissing if you want the marriage to continue. I said, after you telling me that, I think I'll see a lawyer. I was mad because of her rant. Now she is continuing that rant. I don't want a divorce, but I guess I am going to get one. I apologized for my mistake, and she says too bad, so sad. Go to hell. Next time you talk to her, tell her to be out of the house in 30 days, or I will have her evicted. I continued. I know you are trying to help, but I will not be a whipping boy. She wants to be mad. Tell her to expect to be served as soon as I can contact a lawyer. I won't put you in the middle, so I will leave this afternoon. I won't tell you where I am going, so you won't have to lie to Laura about not knowing. You said I was stupid. Maybe I was, but I do not deserve the screaming banshee that bitch was when she cussed me out. I won't be hurt like that again. I know my thought of an annulment was really stupid, but I apologized. She hasn't. I left that afternoon and went to Chicago and rented a hotel suite on Lake Shore Doctor that overlooked Lake Michigan. I checked my phone and email. No messages. I called my publisher and asked for a Chicago-based lawyer. I did not tell them why. I called the office they recommended. I was told that they had an office in our home city and I should contact them. I finally decided to go back to the house and get more clothes. When I arrived back in town, I thought I would call and see if Laura was home. She shouldn't be, as it was midday on a Thursday. Surprise, a voice I recognized answered. I said, "Hi James, get the hell out of my house, because what you did to my sister means when I see you I will beat you as bad as I can without killing you. And if my cheating wife is there she can leave with you. I am in town, so you have less than 10 minutes to escape." When I got to the house no one was there. I called Laura's school and was told she quit and left about 5 minutes earlier, saying she got an emergency call and had to leave. I called Natalie. I told her that James and Laura were together running for me. She laughed. My next move was to call the local offices of the Chicago lawyers and set up an appointment. It was for the next day, Friday morning. I arrived at her office and Mrs. Anna Porter introduced herself. When I told her I wanted a divorce and to file under adultery, she asked for proof. I explained that I suspected she was with my brother-in-law and she left town with him. She said that I needed some other, better evidence. I told her I just wanted the pain over with, and if she wouldn't do it, I would find a lawyer who would. She took the case. As Laura was nowhere to be found, and James was gone too, Natalie filed for abandonment and I changed my petition to that too. A year later they were both final. I still don't understand the disrespect, but she is gone now. My agent tells me she has missed the last 4 deadlines on her books and her publisher has canceled her contract. Life is a bitch and then you die. My sister is back in our family home because she got a new position that made her the dean of chemistry at the local university. We are each other's support structure. I am dating, and so is Natalie, but neither one is looking for permanent. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Caught my cheating wife at a restaurant, confronted her, divorced her, then ghosted her forever. The entire episode kicked off when I ventured into an unfamiliar place. Having dropped off one of our more bothersome clients at the airport, enduring a morning filled with his complaints, I felt no rush to return to the office. Given the dreary Tuesday and the prospect of an afternoon reviewing contracts, I decided to stop at a drab-looking bar restaurant about a mile from the airport. The plan was to enjoy a leisurely lunch and a beer or two before heading back to work in the salt mines. Seated in a booth, savoring my beer and contemplating the challenge of finding a decent burger in this world, my attention was captured by a couple entering the restaurant. Observing as they settled into a booth across the room, sitting side by side, I couldn't help but notice the woman. A shapely blonde in a short skirt, showcasing her attractive legs, paired with a tight pink short-sleeved top. Her companion seemed like a thug wannabe, struggling to pull off the look in skinny jeans and a black leather jacket. My heightened interest in this seemingly happy couple becomes clear when I reveal that the woman was Shelley, my sister-in-law, and the guy with her was undoubtedly not her husband, my brother Dave. Worse still, it was evident they were more than casual acquaintances. They placed their drink orders with the waitress and immediately engaged in unrestrained displays of affection, necking in the booth. Shocked, I watched as the guy slid his hand up her thigh, under the short skirt. Shelley broke their kiss, letting her head fall back against the booth, sighing. The question wasn't whether I would address this situation, that was a given. The real dilemma was whether I could restrain myself from confronting them violently right there in the restaurant. I had never been fond of Shelley, disliking her from the time my brother started dating her. My pessimism persisted when he fell head over heels in love with her and announced their marriage just 4 months into the relationship. Dave, at 23, seemed unaware of what he was getting into, however. There was simply no way to convey to him that Shelley was everything to him. To me, she was a pretty, cheerful, somewhat shallow and selfish girl, not nearly as smart or interesting as Dave himself. They both seemed to adore the same person, Shelley. He would do anything for her, and that's exactly what she liked. To my pleasant surprise, the first 3 years of their marriage appeared to be very happy. However, the scene unfolding 30 feet from me suggested that the happy days were over. The guy she was with now had his hand on Shelley's waist, kissing her neck as he worked her over. With her eyes closed, she didn't see me approach and was startled when I sat down across the table from them, casually greeting Shelley. The comical moment unfolded as her eyes popped open and her boyfriend pulled his hands off her. Turning to look at me, her face went from momentarily startled to stunned and then truly shocked. Her jaw dropped and she froze, staring blankly at me. His face held the same startled look momentarily before turning annoyed. Before he could speak, I continued in a cordial manner, inquiring about how she'd been and asking about Dave. Turning to him and extending my hand, I introduced myself as Will, Shelley's brother-in-law, emphasizing the connection to her husband, Dave. His eyes widened, and he sat frozen, ignoring my hand. Shelley began to recover herself, babbling about Robbie being an old friend. With a friendly smile, I casually remarked on the relationship situation they were caught in, leaving Shell gasping and hoping I hadn't witnessed their activities. Robbie abruptly stood up and muttered that he had to leave. Without even a glance back at Shelley, he walked swiftly out of the restaurant. Later, I casually remarked to Shelley that Robbie seemed like a nice guy and questioned why he left so suddenly. Internally, I seethed with rage at the treatment my brother Dave was receiving from this woman. Expressing my frustration, I kept my voice down but made it clear that Dave adored Shelley, doing everything for her. However, it wasn't enough for her, as she engaged in illicit activities with a questionable individual sporting greasy hair and a poorly executed Matt Dillon mustache. Shelley looked terrified, her face turning pale in response to my accusations. She stammered, trying to explain, but her voice trailed off without a conclusion. After observing her for a minute, I unleashed my anger, expressing disappointment at her actions. I questioned how long this had been going on and how many others she was involved with. Shelley pleaded, grabbing my hand desperately, and begged me not to tell Dave. Despite her pleas, I considered informing my brother about his wife's infidelity. I questioned whether he deserved to know the truth about the person he was married to. Shell was either incredibly naive or too stunned to think clearly. I pulled my hand free, contemplating whether I should reveal the painful truth to Dave. Her eyes were wild, and she seemed to be thinking frantically. I sat back with a smile, curious about what she would offer to keep me silent. Shelley, after some contemplation, changed her expression. She pleaded with me not to tell Dave, promising to reveal the entire story. According to her, she claimed that another woman, someone I was involved with, was cheating on me. I laughed at the seemingly far-fetched revelation. Shelley looked at me steadily, insisting that she wasn't kidding. According to her, the other woman had been seeing a guy from the health club for at least a couple of weeks. This certainty unsettled me, even though I knew it to be impossible. We had been together for 7 happy years of marriage and a decade overall. She was devoted, sensible, kind, thoughtful, and the most honest person I knew. She loved me, and I was sure of it, just as sure as I was of my own love for her. Shelley leaned forward, sensing my confusion. She claimed to be telling the truth, mentioning that the other woman had confided in her about the affair the previous week. I scrutinized her face, trying to gather my thoughts. Despite her initial terror, Shelley appeared calm and in control, as if she were sharing a genuine revelation rather than spinning a wild and desperate tale. While I couldn't immediately dismiss what she was saying, it was challenging to believe given our history and her recent behavior. Seated at the dinner table, my gaze returned to Shelley, who seemed to be anticipating my next move. Although I didn't reveal it to her, concealing her infidelity from Dave was not an option. I needed to uncover the truth about him. I spoke slowly, suggesting that perhaps we could reach an agreement. After some contemplation, I expressed my unwillingness to let Anne deceive me. I proposed that if Shelley could help me gather information about Anne's actions, I wouldn't disclose what I had witnessed that afternoon to Dave. However, I laid down a condition. She had to swear not to see Robbie or any other man besides Dave. Relief washed over her face as she swore to comply. She asked, "Will you have my word on it?" I remained skeptical about the value of her word. Responding to her question, I inquired about what she would be willing to do to fulfill her part of the agreement. Expressing my desire to gather information about Anne's affair, I suggested a plan to Shelley. I proposed providing her with a tape recorder to conceal in her apartment. The idea was for her to invite Anne over, offer some wine, and engage in casual conversation, encouraging Anne to reveal details about her affair. I specified that I wanted to know the identity of the man, when and how the affair started, how often she had been with him, and the reasons behind her actions. As I spoke to Shelley, I realized that I was starting to believe her unusual story about Anne's infidelity, which infuriated me. Shelley nodded in agreement, stating that she could carry out the plan. She suggested softening Anne up by sharing the details of my own affair, making it feel like a genuine relationship conversation. Sarcastically, I questioned if Robbie was the only one who had been involved with her or if there were others. She quickly denied any others, but I remained unconvinced. 20 minutes later, I was driving back to the office, contemplating somber thoughts about the potential end of Dave's marriage and the looming possibility of the end of mine. My first instinct might have been to call Dave and inform him about what I had witnessed Shelley doing, but I recognized that it wasn't an option. I had always been the steady older brother, while Dave was the charming and outgoing one with a history of short-lived relationships due to his talkative nature. When Dave met Shelley, everything changed. Despite being a confident and charming individual, he became a lovesick schoolboy. Within a month or two, Shelley had completely captivated him, and he was determined to marry her. Dave idolized Shelley, considering her incapable of doing any wrong. Knowing Dave's unwavering devotion to Shelley, I refrained from speaking to him until I had concrete evidence. I realized that he wouldn't believe she was cheating unless he heard it directly from her. Despite my hopes that Shell might be lying or mistaken about Anne's faithfulness to me, the likelihood diminished. The possibility that Shelley could have lied to me out of desperation crossed my mind, but I also considered the consequences of discovering it was all a fabrication. When I arrived at my office, I took out a pad and made notes on the steps I would have to take if the worst turned out to be true. This included considerations about credit cards, selling the house, transferring car titles, and more. I hoped that in a few days I would be able to discard that sheet of paper. When I arrived home for dinner, cheerfully humming in the kitchen as she set the table, she greeted me with a big hug and a kiss. Appearing as the loving wife I'd usually be happy to see at the end of the day. Despite my suspicions, cultivated over the past 7 years, I knew I had to play the innocent husband for a few more days. Underneath the surface, I felt a mix of fury and hurt, unsure of how to process my emotions. We chatted amicably during dinner, but when she mentioned her workout at the health club during dessert, I couldn't resist a bit of probing. I casually remarked to Shelley, commenting on her recent dedication to workouts. I asked if the club was now offering free ice cream. She laughed, though I noticed a slight flush on her face. She explained that she had been enjoying the positive feeling of a good, sweaty workout and coming home to her loving husband. She also mentioned that a few weeks ago the black slacks I liked were starting to feel tight, but now they fit perfectly. She beamed affectionately, and despite my concerns about her fidelity, I couldn't help but appreciate her beauty and my love for her. If she were truly cheating on me, I couldn't help but feel conflicted and unsure of how to navigate the situation. Despite what the court calendar officially stated, my marriage ended exactly 1 week later, on another Tuesday. Shelley and I had orchestrated everything. I provided her with a small tape recorder to hide in her living room, and she arranged for Anne to drop by for lunch on a Tuesday afternoon when Anne had a day off from work. Shelley, who didn't have a job, kept me on edge throughout that afternoon in my office, pretending to work, contemplating what the women were discussing and its potential impact on my life. At 4:30, when Shelley called and informed me that they were done and Anne had left, my heart sank. Desperately hoping for a different outcome, I asked if Anne had talked to her about it. Shelley, sounding a little drunk, giggled affirmatively. She shared that she had told Anne about Robbie, and Anne in turn disclosed details about Moran, emphasizing that he was a really big fella. Feeling the tension, I realized I was squeezing the phone so tightly that my fingers ached. I agreed to drop by in 20 minutes. When I reached Shelley's place, she handed me the tape recorder at the door, reminding me of the promise I made not to disclose anything. I assured her that he wouldn't hear a word from me. I emphasized the importance of ensuring that Anne never found out about the recording, as she might become furious and potentially tell Dave. Nodding in acknowledgement, I turned and left. That evening was one of the most painful of my life. Knowing I couldn't listen to the tape until Anne was asleep, I continued pretending to be the loving husband. While she was still a little tipsy, she shared that she had spent the afternoon with Shelley and had consumed a lot of wine. Additionally, she was amorous. After clearing the dinner dishes, she pulled me towards the bedroom, asking if I had a little something for her tonight in a flirtatious tone. I questioned whether I could or even wanted to go through with it. The thought crossed my mind that it might be the last time I would ever have closeness with Anne. Still hoping against all reason that she might not have been unfaithful, I followed her into the bedroom, and we had lovemaking. For me, it wasn't making love. My torn heart and worried mind overshadowed any pleasure. We rested for a while in each other's arms, then repeated the act. A few minutes later, Anne was fast asleep, snoring gently on her side next to me. I retreated to the guest room, closed the door behind me, and listened to the tape. The first few minutes of conversation between Shelley and Anne were breezy and casual, with Shelley keeping the wine flowing. After a while, she confessed to Anne that she had something to share. She proceeded to share the details of her affair with the a-hole Robbie. It became evident that Anne was already aware of the affair, and Shelley was merely providing her with the juicy specifics to soften her up. Shelley executed her role admirably, even confessing with a laugh that Robbie was just the latest, not the best. There had been a guy named Ellis, but unfortunately, he had moved out of town. Anne giggled and pretended to be shocked, though she appeared to be enjoying the story. The explicit details of the sleazy narrative had little effect on me. I already knew what Shelley was, and the added specifics would only make it easier to convince Dave that she had indeed cheated on him. Anxiously awaiting the inevitable, I resisted the urge to fast-forward the tape. Eventually, Shelley redirected the conversation towards Anne, expressing curiosity about my story. She giggled. mentioning that all I had shared so far was meeting him at the health club and his well-endowed nature. My body tensed as I listened to Anne's voice on the recording, laughing and describing Moran as amazing, the largest she had ever encountered. She went on to share more details, expressing initial doubts about it fitting inside her, leading to laughter from both women. Overwhelmed by the revelations, I stopped the tape and leaned back in my chair, absorbing the painful truth. My marriage was now officially over. Did I even want to hear the rest? I considered letting my lawyer listen to it. After some thought, I switched the machine back on. It was time to face the entire story, confront the anger and pain, and begin the process of figuring out what the rest of my life would look like. Shelley inquired about the beginning of the affair, asking how it started. Anne responded, explaining that she never meant to cheat on me and felt terrible about it. She mentioned our happiness together and expressed her disbelief in engaging in infidelity. She attributed it to having a bad case of BDF, which she found amusing. Laughing, Anne heard Shelley ask about BDF, and she promised to explain after having more wine. Anne continued sharing that she had been going to the health club for a couple of years to avoid getting saggy and to maintain my interest. A few months ago, she started noticing a new trainer named Moran, describing him as hot, with broad shoulders and amazing muscles. She mentioned his flirtatious behavior with women and recalled witnessing him talking quietly with Patty McAllister, a former colleague. Anne watched Patty enter Moran's office, and later, in the locker room, Patty appeared well-drilled, exhibiting a dreamy-eyed look and a vague smile. I greeted Patty and noticed her happy demeanor. She shared that she had a bad case of BTF, explaining it as big tool fever. She giggled, ensuring no one could hear her, and recounted her experiences with Moran, emphasizing his sensational qualities as a love-making partner and the impressive size of his tool. Patty described how Moran had flirted with her, eventually convincing her to go into his office, leading to an ongoing carnal relationship at the club. She expressed that he was incredible, providing her with the craziest lovemaking she had ever experienced. While her revelations caught my attention, I had no initial plans to take any action, considering Patty's divorce status and her freedom to play with whomever she liked. Over the next couple of weeks, my curiosity about Moran grew. I responded more attentively when he flirted with me, such as brushing against me or touching my shoulder while assisting me with the machines. During one workout session, as I performed bench presses in a nearly empty area, he stood behind me as if to spot me. Looking up, I noticed his shorts right above my head, and the sizable bulge of his package caught my attention. I couldn't believe how big and thick it looked in his shorts. He smiled down at me, aware of what I was looking at. I almost dropped the bar on my chest but managed to finish my reps. As I put the bar back on the rack, he took my hand off the bar and slid it gently down over his shorts. His tool felt as enormous as it looked, and it was hard as a rock. Then, after a couple of minutes, he gently pulled me to my feet, looked around to ensure no one was there, and led me by the hand into his office. I wasn't thinking, kind of dazed. He locked the door behind us, sat me down in a chair, and without a word, pulled off his shorts, standing in front of me. I swear I wasn't thinking at all. We had wild lovemaking. By the time he finished, I was beside myself, exhausted and totally spent. Shelley reacted with an impressed wow, and it seemed like she genuinely meant it. She assumed that Anne had continued seeing Moran. Anne explained that after the encounter in Moran's office, she had drifted into the shower feeling dreamy and weak in the knees, wiped out. She cleaned up and went home, overwhelmed by guilt and fear of being discovered by me. Surprisingly, I didn't suspect anything that night, and it seemed normal. Despite my desire for closeness, she made an excuse, fearing I might notice a change. The following night, she mentioned giving me the full treatment, engaging in closeness until I couldn't continue. Anne admitted staying away from the gym for 2 weeks following the incident. I just knew I couldn't be anywhere near Moran without being tempted again. Finally, I told myself it had been a one-time thing. I was a grown woman with a wonderful husband, and I could resist him. So I started going back, and the first couple of times it was fine. Moran winked at me and flirted a little, but he left me alone, and I thought, this is okay. I'm over this. I relaxed my guard a little. Then about a week after that, he caught me again at the bench, and the room was empty. He got my hand on his tool, and in no time, we were back in his office. Shelley finished her sentence, expressing how much better it was. Anne, speaking somewhat dreamily, struggled to describe the experience. She conveyed her deep love for closeness with me, emphasizing our satisfaction in each other, and confessed that she had never been tempted to fool around before, even with a flirtatious coworker named Alex. Despite his success with other girls, Anne had remained uninterested. However, with Moran, she felt as though she had never experienced such pleasure before. Giggling, Anne acknowledged the absurdity of sharing such details, emphasizing that there was nothing particularly special about Moran. She clarified that she had no interest in him as a person or a lover. It was solely about the physical aspect. She referred to it as God's gift, prompting laughter from both her and Shelley. I listened to the two of them and felt the anger coursing through my veins. I sat through the rest of the tape, but there wasn't much more. Once he'd had lovemaking with her a second time, he gave up all attempts to resist. She'd been with him 2 to 3 times a week for nearly a month, and there was no sign she was ready to stop. In fact, she said that she'd been enjoying lovemaking with me more lately as well, perhaps because her secret was kind of a turn-on. It was clear that her BTF had overcome whatever guilt she might have been feeling about betraying me, the love of her life, her husband of 7 years, the man who was completely devoted to her and who still remembered what forsaking all others was supposed to mean. It took a while to think through my plans, and it was 2:30 a.m. by the time I went to sleep in the guest room. I was done seeing and sleeping next to her or even talking to her. I slipped into the bedroom and got clothes for the next day without waking her. At 6:30 a.m., I was up and out the door. I left a brief and cold note, trying not to reveal anything, stating that Anne had an early meeting due to my call, apologizing for forgetting to mention it. I made 2 copies of the tape last night at the office. By 8:30, I was on the phone with my best friend from college, who worked at a downtown law firm. I requested a favor, asking him to arrange an hour with the meanest and most bloodthirsty divorce lawyer in his firm. There was a moment of silence, and he expressed shock, apologizing for the situation. After a brief conversation, Eddie showed me into the office of Margaret Adamson, a lead partner in his firm known for her intimidating presence. Eddie had described her as someone even sharks would avoid in the ocean. Margaret's look and handshake confirmed that she meant business, and I was already relieved that she would be representing me rather than Anne. I played Margaret and Eddie part of the tape. After hearing the initial moments, Margaret instructed her assistant to hold her calls, and we listened to the rest. When it concluded, we sat in silence for a minute. Margaret then straightforwardly asked, "Okay, what do you want?" Expressing my desire for a divorce due to infidelity. I emphasized avoiding the cliché of irreconcilable differences. I mentioned being reasonable about our savings, but insisted on keeping the house. Additionally, I wanted Anne to revert to her maiden name, as I believed she no longer deserved to be Mrs. Will Harris. Margaret nodded, studying me intently, and then requested a brief break with Eddie to discuss the legal details. Within 5 minutes, I was back in Margaret's office, and she was ready to proceed. She assured me that the divorce would likely proceed smoothly with Anne accepting the terms. However, she mentioned that the tape would be inadmissible since Anne was unaware of its recording. I grimaced and disclosed the complication involving my sister-in-law Shelley's infidelity, her offer to help, and the content of the first part of the tape. I explained my intention to inform my brother, acknowledging that he would be devastated. Half ironically, I suggested Margaret consider handling my brother's divorce as well. She looked at Eddie and then back at me. We started by listening to Shelley's part of the tape, and after another huddle between Margaret and Eddie, she remarked, "Quite a pair of wives you two picked." Seeing my reaction, she apologized, acknowledging it was inappropriate. Margaret then outlined the situation, stating that the tape might not be admissible against Anne due to her unawareness. But Shelley could be subpoenaed to testify about what Anne told her. It shouldn't make much difference. Once Anne's attorney hears the tape, he won't be in much position to fight. In your brother Dave's case, the tape is admissible because Shelley knew she was being recorded, so she's got no defense whatsoever. That divorce will be easy as long as he's not totally unreasonable. Then there's the health club. We can sue both them and Moran. Moran won't have much money, presumably, but Eddie and I can pretty much guarantee you a nice big check from the club, somewhere in the high 6 figures to $1.5 million. The tape could be used in a civil lawsuit, and there's no way in hell they would ever let this get into the newspapers. Think of all the husbands who'd be canceling their wives' club memberships. She laughed briefly, maintaining a somewhat intimidating demeanor. Margaret assured me that she would initiate the divorce documents, and Eddie escorted me out of the office. He expressed his apologies, assuring me that Margaret would fulfill my requests. Despite feeling terrible about the situation, I tried to smile and reassured him, saying, "It's okay, Eddie. This just means you and I will have more time to play tennis together." I expressed my gratitude, thanked him, and left. The rest of the day, I submerged myself in details. I arranged a locksmith to meet me at the house at 4:30. I made a dinner date with Dave so I wouldn't be around when Anne came home. I cut off her credit cards and arranged separate accounts for our money. And I wrote her a note. It took several tries, not easy to say goodbye to the love of your life, even under these circumstances. When I finally finished it, I put it in an envelope, wrote Anne's name on the front, and took it home. The locksmith finished by about 5:15. I had a beer, sitting by myself quietly in the kitchen. Then I taped the note to the outside of the front door, locked it, and left. I knew Anne would be home between 6 and 6:30. I idly wondered what she'd do first, try the door and find her key didn't work, or read the note. Our marriage is over now. You'll be free to play around all you want with Moran and his big tool. I've had the locks changed. If you want to get your clothing and personal things, call my attorney. I left Margaret's name and number. She'll arrange for you to have supervised access to the house when I'm not here. I won't be talking to you again. You broke my heart. I loved you as much as any man can love a woman, and I looked forward to our growing old together. Too bad our marriage vows didn't mean as much to you as some lovemaking with a big tool, or as much as they did to me. When Dave joined me for dinner, he immediately sensed that something was amiss. After placing our orders, I took a deep breath and disclosed that Anne had been cheating on me, and I was planning to divorce her. His reaction was evident, staring at me with an open mouth, a sight I hadn't witnessed before. He expressed shock, exclaiming, "Oh my God, Will, my God! Anne, are you sure?" Realizing the obvious, he apologized, acknowledging it as a foolish question. He could see the truth in my expression and asked if I wanted to talk about it. I did, sharing my hurt and despair with my best friend over dinner. The beers provided some comfort, but having Dave's unwavering support meant even more. Towards the end of the meal, I revealed another aspect, mentioning that there's one part of it I haven't told him. Shelley is the one who got me proof. She taped a conversation of her and Anne talking, and Anne told her the whole sorry business. Dave looked at me sympathetically, expressing his sorrow. He added that he hoped it wouldn't make me angry, but he felt lucky to have a fantastic wife like Shelley. He mentioned that he's not surprised she helped me, as she has always liked me. He acknowledged that I haven't always approved of her but began praising her. I couldn't bear to hear more praise for Shelley, especially considering the circumstances. I interrupted him, saying, "Listen, Dave, wait. Don't say anything else. Let me pay the bill and I need you to come back to the house with me." A note with Will written on it in a flowery handwriting was found under the screen door. Without reading it, I dropped the note on the hall table and ushered him into the guest room. I communicated the seriousness of the situation to Dave, expressing my love for him and emphasizing our friendship. He responded with a wary look, not accustomed to such conversations. I urged him to listen to a tape recorded by Shelley, instructing him to stay seated while I went to another room. Rewinding the tape to the beginning, I pushed the tape recorder toward him and left. In the subsequent moments, I heard quiet murmurs from the tape, followed by a crash. Dave, seemingly agitated, paced around while the tape continued to play until it fell into silence. Upon entering the kitchen, Dave confronted me with intense anger, accusing me of relishing in the knowledge about Shelley and deliberately keeping it from him. He berated me for allowing him to praise her without revealing the truth. He insisted that I must be enjoying the situation, accusing me of harboring a long-standing dislike for Shelley. In response, I stood up and raised my voice, questioning what I had just discovered about him. My glare intensified, and gradually Dave's demeanor softened. His shoulders slumped, fists unclenched, and he sat down at the table, resembling an old man. After a moment, he apologized, saying, "Sorry, Will. I know you're hurting, just like I am. It's just, you obviously knew about this. Why didn't you tell me?" "Dave," I said as gently as I could, "you know how you were about Shelley. You would never have believed me. Remember that fight we had when I criticized something she'd said to Mom? I found out about Shell a week ago and I knew that I couldn't possibly tell you. You had to hear it for yourself. I only got the tape from her yesterday." The two of us emptied a few beer bottles while I told Dave the whole story. I began with seeing Shell and Robbie at the restaurant, then the deal she offered me, the making of the tape, and my conversation with Margaret Adamson. "She's handling my divorce, and she'll be happy to represent you too if you want. Our cases are pretty much a shoe-in," she says. We talked late into the night, and then Dave crashed in my guest room. He didn't have the heart to face Shelley. The phone rang several times, but we didn't answer it, and finally I just left it off the hook. A few days went by, and then a few weeks. Anne kept calling for a while, leaving me messages of her crying and begging to talk to me, but I didn't answer or call her back. I just didn't see any reason to talk to her. She tried finding me at work, but I'd asked our receptionist to tip me off, and I ducked out of my office each time she showed up. A couple of times I saw her car parked in front of the house when I came home from work, so I just drove right by and stayed away for a couple of hours until she left. Margaret Adamson did her work beautifully. The divorce papers were served. She fought through all the legal maneuvers that Anne's lawyer tried to pull, and a court date was set. In his initial conversations with Margaret, he claimed that no infidelity had taken place. Once she sent him a copy of the tape, we stopped hearing that line. Instead, he pointed out that the tape was inadmissible. Margaret didn't even dignify that one with a response. She just sat tight, and as the court date approached, Anne's lawyer finally called Margaret to ask for a settlement conference. The day after listening to the tape, Dave moved out of his apartment with Shelley and into my guest room. He drove over and watched the place until she went out, then called me. The two of us packed up everything he wanted and got out of there in less than 2 hours. He told me, "I don't want to see her. I don't want to hear a word she has to say. I just want to get the hell away from her." His eyes started to tear up and I turned away. Was it a good thing or a bad thing that I knew just how he felt? Shelley left me a couple of angry, cursing messages at home, a nice counterpoint to Anne's remorseful ones. After a day or two, I started screening the messages, deleting any from Shelley or Anne as soon as I heard their voices. Shelley called Dave at work and sent him letters, but he never responded to them. Margaret was handling his divorce too, and he and I just sat back and let her run the show. To my amazement, the lawsuits against Moran and the health club were resolved first. The one against Moran never went anywhere. He disappeared one day and left no forwarding address. But the health club, eager to avoid negative publicity, just as Margaret had predicted, reached a $1.1 million settlement. I signed a pledge of confidentiality and walked away with the largest check I'd ever seen. In less than 10 weeks, my brother was a rock, and I guess I was for him too. We lived like two bachelors, going out to eat a lot, taking in a ball game from time to time, or just sitting around and talking over a few beers. We talked about Anne and Shelley, about our lives with them, about how many great women there were out there just waiting for us. It wasn't easy to believe that last bit, and yet we were really able to help each other. I could see as plain as day that there wasn't a thing wrong with Dave that led to Shelley's behavior. She was simply a selfish strumpet. Likewise, Dave reassured me that Anne's cheating wasn't a reflection on me, just an indication of how screwed up she was. Neither of us probably believed the other one all that much, but it still helped to hear it. Dave was divorced first, as it turned out. He made it clear that he wouldn't talk to Shelley under any circumstances, and so Margaret handled the whole thing. She told him that Shell had fought for more money at first, but that with the tape she didn't have a leg to stand on. I went into the office with him the day he had to sign the papers. Shelley had already signed them. He smiled grimly, shook Margaret's hand, thanked her, and then went off to the men's room. I heard him crying through the door when I went to find him. 3 weeks later, it was my turn. We met on a Tuesday, Anne, me, and the two lawyers. Anne's lawyer had agreed to a settlement but insisted on 2 conditions: that I drop infidelity as a reason for the divorce, and that I meet privately with Anne before we signed the papers. I told Margaret I was willing to see Anne, but not willing to drop infidelity. Eventually, we agreed that I'd give Anne a chance to persuade me. If she could do so, we'd change it to irreconcilable differences, that old standby. In a weird way, I was looking forward to hearing what Anne had to say. Maybe I'm a masochist, but I loved her for 10 years, and I couldn't really imagine simply walking away without one final conversation. When I got there, Anne was sitting in the conference room wearing a blue dress she knew I'd always loved. Her hair was shorter, and it looked great. She was pale, but she was the same beautiful woman I had loved for so long. "Okay, Anne, it's your meeting," I said neutrally. My heart was pounding, but I tried to look calm. "Just 2 things, all right? Please don't tell me how much you love me, and don't tell me it was just love-making." She flushed, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. "Will, I'm so sorry, but how can I not say those things? I screwed up, plain and simple. I was selfish and thoughtless, and I hurt you. But it was just love-making. Nothing but a stupid, stupid impulse I gave into. You can't imagine how much I've gone over it, how many times I wished I'd never done it. Yes, well, but you did do it, didn't you?" I had no intention of making this easy for her. Just being in the same room with her, knowing that we were about to separate for good and why, broke my heart all over again. I went to the window and gazed out, unwilling to let her see my stricken face. Behind me, I could hear her crying softly. "Baby, it didn't mean anything. You know it was the dumbest, most hurtful thing I could ever have done to you. I know that, but it meant nothing to me. It has nothing to do with how much I love you." I let her talk a bit more, listening to the pleading tone, the sweet voice I had always loved, but not hearing a single word that I couldn't have predicted. She had nothing to say to me that I didn't already know, and nothing that made a damn bit of difference. After a while, I turned around and came back to the table, sitting down directly across from her. "And just so you know, I still love you very much." but it's over between us. She started to cry again. You took from me, from us, the most precious thing we had together, aside from our love, the bond of trust between us. How could I ever make love to you again, wondering if it was me you were thinking about or Moran and his freak show tool? How would I know whether you were loving me or missing him? And how could I live with you, wondering where you were every time you were 10 minutes late coming home, wondering what you were doing on your lunch hour, wondering whether you'd found another big tool to play around with? I waited, but she had no reply to make. Finally, between the sobs, she said, "Please, baby, please, couldn't you give me one more chance? Anne, I'll give you a few minutes to think about this one. What if I had met some bimbo with fantastic big jugs and started bawling her on the side for a few weeks? Nobody I liked or respected, just a handsome girl who was a fantastic lay, who gave me a degree of pure physical pleasure that I never got from you. And then you found out about it. Could you stay with me? Could you get past the feelings of hurt, the sense of total betrayal? Could you overcome the doubts you'd have about your own attractiveness, the fears that you weren't ever going to be the one I really wanted?" She looked up at me with the saddest eyes I had ever seen. "Will, I don't have to think about it. I've thought about it for weeks now. Could I forgive you? Could I take you back if it were the other way around?" And the answer is no, I couldn't. I just couldn't handle those feelings. I know that. So I'm asking you to do something I couldn't do, to be a braver, stronger person than I could ever be, and to give me a chance to make it up to you. A lifetime to show you how sorry I am and how much I love you. There was silence, a minute, 2 minutes. As we looked at one another, both of us thinking about all we had meant to one another and how we had arrived at this point. I stood up slowly, hating myself and hating her for cheating on me, and now for throwing it all back on me. I don't know whether I can't do it or won't do it, but I'm not that braver, stronger person you want me to be. Goodbye. And I waited by the open door for a moment, looking back, giving her a chance for the last word. She had her head down, crying. She didn't say anything else. Margaret was waiting for me down the hall, a surprisingly sympathetic look on her hard face. Let her have irreconcilable differences, I growled. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference to me. Dave and I sat at my kitchen table. We'd had a few, but we weren't drunk. Listen, I said, I've made some plans. He nodded, and I went on. After the lawyer fees, I still have nearly $800,000 from that settlement. I've invested all but $50,000 of it in some nice safe places, so there will be a lovely nest egg for when we're old and feeble. But the last 50 grand has been designated to the Will and Dave Harris Recovery Fund, and we're going to start spending some of it. I've rented us 4 weeks at a 2-bedroom condo in Cancun, starting 2 weeks from now. Go tell your office you're taking some time off. We are going to be a pair of fun-loving bachelors, 2 gay divorces, if you know what I mean. He just raised an eyebrow, and I laughed. No, a whole, gay as in cheerful. We've done enough moping around, telling each other how badly we've been screwed over. Cancun was a blast, or at least as much of one as it can be for 2 guys recovering from broken hearts. We got a lot of sun, played a lot of tennis, swam a lot, and drank a lot, though we kept one another from going off the deep end. With each passing day, we got tanner, a little fitter, and slightly further from the nightmare we'd just lived through. And let me say, God bless my charismatic and charming brother. Despite the blow to his self-confidence that Shelley had laid on him, he got his old groove back, and we had a lot of female companionship. His favorite stunt, and damned if it didn't succeed 75% of the time, was to spot 2 attractive women sitting together. He dragged me straight over to their table, smiled winningly, and said, "Pardon me, ladies. I'm sure you wouldn't be comfortable letting a stranger buy you a drink, so let me introduce my brother, Will Harris." Then it was up to me, the shyer one, to say, "Delighted to meet you both. This is my brother, Dave Harris." Then he would step back and, "Phew, glad that's taken care of. Now may we buy you a drink?" By this time, the women were usually at least grinning, if not laughing. And we'd mostly find ourselves with female companionship for the evening. Sometimes the companionship lasted until breakfast. After all, unattached women in Cancun were as eager for fun as we were. I had maybe 6 different women in my bed over those 4 weeks, and I imagine Dave's number was a little higher. Mostly it was fun, just laughter and pleasure and keeping it light. The first couple of times I made love to a woman, I was tentative, distracted by thoughts of Moran and his huge tool. Even though both he and Anne were thousands of miles away. It was hard to compete with what I knew he had done to her. But the women didn't seem to notice, and being with someone new got easier each time. One-night stands may not be for everyone, or for every stage in a person's life, but they seemed to be what Dave and I needed. Only one of the women was different, Shannon, a tall Irish redhead a year younger than I was. We did all the same things, Had some drinks, laughed a lot, went for dinner, did some dancing, and back to my place, to bed. She was handsome and responsive, as eager to be with me as I was to be with her. We had a lot of fun. When it got different was later, around 3 a.m. For some reason I woke up and just lay in bed, Shannon softly breathing in sleep beside me. Thoughts of Anne filled my head, Anne and all that we had had together, and how it had been taken from me. I started crying very quietly, and before I knew it, Shannon was kneeling beside me, holding me in her arms, saying, "Let it out, baby, it's okay." I was embarrassed, but I couldn't stop. She kept soothing me, and finally, in response to her urgings, I told her the whole story. By the time I was done, the sun was rising. We shuffled into the kitchen, and I made breakfast for us while she told me her own story. Also a divorce, no cheating, just a husband who grew ever more distant, ever more driven and career-oriented, until there was just no marriage left. She'd been on her own for nearly 2 years. After eating, we found our way back to the bedroom without a word spoken and made love. The night before had been screwing, fun, exciting, friendly, but just love-making. This time, we looked into each other's eyes, murmured tenderly, and found a very different level of closeness. My one-night stand with Shannon turned into 4 wonderful nights. In the afternoon, she left. My brother Dave was a little worried about me, I think, urging me to meet new ladies. He mentioned it was time to move on. I acknowledged that Shannon was special. He agreed, saying he liked her too. However, he reminded me that she had gone home, and we still had 10 more days to spend down here. He dragged me off to the tennis court, then the pool, and by that evening we were chatting with 2 secretaries from San Francisco on their very first trip outside the United States. That night, they slept in their own hotel room, but the next afternoon Barbara joined me in my room for her first ever experience on foreign soil. Dave and I went out for dinner at a steak place we both liked. It had been 8 months since Cancun. Dave had long since found a terrific apartment he liked, but we still spent a lot of time together. Just after we ordered, Dave leaned forward and mentioned quietly that across the room, 2 couples had just sat down, and one of them was Anne, with some guy. I appreciated the warning, and despite my sudden thumping heart, I waited a few seconds before casually turning around to look across the dance floor. She had already spotted us and was looking steadily over at me. I gave her a friendly, non-committal smile and a wave, and she smiled back. Then I forced myself to turn around and chat some more with my brother. He inquired if this was the first time I had seen her since the divorce, and I nodded. I admitted that I didn't think I'd have this much of a reaction, but the surprise had something to do with it. I suggested to Dave that he do me a favor. Let's enjoy our dinner and not tell me anything about what she's doing over there, how she looks. I don't want to know. Dave agreed, saying that it's fine, and then he launched into a funny story about a CO worker who had been flirting with him for a couple of weeks. While he wasn't terribly interested in her, he was enjoying the game. While enjoying our coffees and casually observing the dancing couples, I felt a hand on my shoulder and heard that familiar voice inquiring about my well-being. Rising from my seat, I gazed into Anne's eyes and offered a greeting, once again caught off guard. She suggested a dance for old time's sake, and I agreed willingly. As we danced, memories flooded back, her warmth in my arms, her beauty, and the nostalgia for happier times. Amidst discussing mundane topics like our jobs and the weather, we eventually lapsed into silence, lost in the emotions of holding her again. I reflected on the dances we shared and the realization that those moments were now memories. Towards the end of the dance, Anne pulled back to look into my eyes and inquired about my well-being. Despite not owing her any honesty, I decided to share my feelings. I expressed that I was all right, pretty good, I guessed. Some days were better than others. Seeing her that night, dancing together, was powerful, and I didn't know I would feel this much. Anne, with a serious expression, confessed that she wasn't so all right. She missed me every day, and being in my arms again had a profound effect on her. Unsure of how to respond, I remained silent as the music played its last chords. Anne hesitated to let me go and shared. A thought, had I ever wondered if I made the right decision? She admitted that she still thought about us all the time, but usually didn't get much past wondering why I made the wrong decision. Later, when I dropped Dave off, he expressed concern about my well-being. I reassured him, acknowledging the inevitability of such encounters in a small town. Confirming our tennis plans for the next day, I headed home. In the dim bedroom, as I undressed quietly, Shannon rolled over towards me and inquired about my evening with Dave. I shared the strangeness of the encounter, contemplating that it might have been for the best that she hadn't joined. She responded with a loving smile, proposing that I hold her for a few minutes. Embracing, I felt her tender kisses along the side of my neck, savoring her familiar scent. Cheated husband discovers wife's secret affairs, delivers cold revenge, and vanishes from her life. Tom was laboring over fresh test data, a tedious yet essential task for him and his team's month-long effort on the test vehicle. Despite its dullness, he found himself correlating and tabulating the information for analysis. Mid-task, his phone buzzed with a text notification, but he paid little attention to the sender's identity. Only after a pause in his work did he glance away from the screen and notice the alert. Curiosity piqued, he picked up his phone, revealing an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Though tempted to dismiss it as spam, he reconsidered, wondering if it might be a colleague's unregistered cell number. Upon opening the message, his initial confusion turned to shock as he found an explicit image displayed on his screen. It took a moment for him to process the unexpected content. A close-up of a woman's private parts, clearly showing a recent calculation. Reading the accompanying text, look closely. You still have time. Bradley's, 6 p.m. He initially dismissed it as a misdirected attempt at solicitation, finding a hint of amusement in the situation. However, a closer examination of the image revealed a tiny detail that froze him in disbelief. A mole near the woman's private parts, unmistakably belonging to his wife Tanya. Doubt flooded his mind as he desperately sought to disprove what he saw, but the evidence only strengthened his conviction. Questions raced through his mind as he recalled Tanya's supposed whereabouts, en route to Boston for a crucial work engagement. Yet, here he was, confronted with an image that suggested otherwise. With the clock ticking towards 5:15 p.m., the timing of the message clashed with Tanya's scheduled landing in Boston at 4:30 p.m. Although she typically checked in upon arrival, it seemed plausible that she was preoccupied with her team's arrangements. Despite the whirlwind of emotions, Tom opted to reply to the text first before considering further action. Not particularly original, but entirely expected. Who is this? How did you obtain this image? Am I expected to meet you at Bradley's? As he prepared to wrap up for the day, he made a firm decision to head to Bradley's. He was determined to get answers one way or another, sending a text to Tanya. How was your flight? I'm going out for a bite. Give me a call when available. He aimed to keep things low-key and gather information discreetly. Walking toward his car, his phone buzzed once more. Assuming it was Tanya, he checked his phone, only to find a response from the mystery sender. I'll be there, but I'm sure you'll find someone more interesting than me. Feeling overwhelmed, he hurried to his car while checking the map on his phone. Bradley's was 30 minutes away, and it was already 5:40. He'd arrive shortly after 6 p.m., uncertain of the importance of timing but hoping he wouldn't miss whoever the texter expected him to meet. During the ride, his phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Tanya. Crazy time with the team. We'll call you later before bed. Love you. He pushed thoughts of their conversation aside. His focus was on his meeting at Bradley's and the mysteries surrounding the texter's knowledge of his wife. Arriving at 6:12, his heart raced as he parked. Since the texter hadn't provided any clues about who to look for, he assumed whoever wanted to meet knew him and would approach him. Yet it was the mention of someone more interesting being present that troubled him most. The texter seemed privy to information he didn't possess, and he feared walking into a trap. Without any other means of uncovering the truth, the image of his wife's carnal parts left him in turmoil. He trusted her completely, and their closeness was satisfying, or so he thought. But the only explanation for someone possessing such an image was troubling. And he was minutes away from discovering the truth, a prospect that filled him with dread. Stepping inside, he allowed his eyes to adjust to the dim lighting. Unfamiliar with the pub's layout, he paused by the entrance to survey the surroundings. A spacious dining area lay ahead, with a bar to his left. Choosing a seat near the end of the bar, he ordered a draft and scanned the dining area. His attention was drawn to a man who had just taken his drink order and was making his way across the room toward a table of smiling individuals. And there, at the table, receiving a drink from the well-dressed man, sat Tanya, adorned in her little black dress and pearls, her smile radiant. He moved mechanically, advancing toward the table where Tanya sat. Just a couple of steps away, her expression shifted from a warm smile to wide-eyed fear upon seeing him. Undeterred, Tom continued, reaching the table and seizing a handful of the well-dressed man's hair with his left hand. He yanked back forcefully, causing the man to drop his drinks and stumble backward, yelping in pain as Tom pulled him past. He released his grip, intending to strike him with his right hand, but the man's rapid retreat left Tom out of range, and he landed on the floor. Before Tom could act further, taking a step toward him, Tom recognized Pete and sternly warned him to stay down. Pete, disheveled and soaked in drink, obeyed without uttering a word. Turning back to Tanya, Tom noticed the table had fallen silent. Familiar faces stared back at him, members of Tanya's team, who had shared meals and gatherings at his home. He mused that team loyalty outweighed betrayal, except for one individual who had chosen to reveal the truth. Briefly considering identifying them, he dismissed the idea as futile. Tom informed Tanya that he was going home and suggested that if there was any hope for their marriage, she should come with him now. Tanya nodded in response, however. Before she could rise, he gestured for her to wait and requested a moment before departing. He addressed Betty Wilson and Bob Thoron, seated nearby. He asked Betty if Bill thought she was in Boston, and Bob if Alice believed the same. Their avoidance confirmed his suspicions. He pondered whether the whole team was involved, realizing that at least one of them was. The drive home was a blur, ending abruptly in his driveway. Inside, he grabbed a beer and sank into the living room, contemplating his acquaintances, familiar with Bill Wilson and Alice Thoron, but unfamiliar with the other couples present. With uncertainty gnawing at him, he debated contacting Bob or Alice but ultimately decided against it. Instead, he sent them a brief message. Just heard Tanya's travel plans changed. Might want to touch base with that. He left the choice of further investigation in their hands, feeling a sense of closure amidst the chaos. It was roughly 20 minutes later when he heard the garage door open and Tanya pull into the garage. He waited in the living room. She entered, still dressed in her LBD, but without the provocative pumps and jewelry. As she calmly walked into the living room and took a seat opposite him on the sofa, he remained quiet. Understanding the power of silence in any conversation, he was resolute in allowing the silence to persist for as long as necessary. It didn't take Tanya long to speak up. "It's not what you think," she began, but he gestured for her to stop. "You have no clue what I think about tonight's events," Tom replied. "I don't need a detailed explanation. We're both engineers, and we know that there's no real or objective answer to any why question. It's often just an attempt to justify unfavorable outcomes, so I won't ask why. Let's start with something simpler. How long? How many times? How frequently? Do our friends know, apart from those at the table who cheat, am I labeled as your betrayed man among your work colleagues and our friends?" "No, Tom, it's not like that at all," Tanya protested. "Our team's travel plans got disrupted, and instead of coming home only to travel again tomorrow, Pete suggested we stay in town for a down day before resuming. I didn't see the whole team there." "Where was everyone else?" Tom inquired. "When we received the news, some of the team chose to stay home one more night and meet us at the airport tomorrow," she admitted. "But you chose to deceive me," he pointed out. "You seemed rather close to Pete. Is there anything happening between the star engineer and the wandering program manager that you'd like to tell me?" "Well, for one, Pete's all right, and he persuaded the owners at Bradley's not to press charges," she said in a positive tone. His eyes widened in utter disbelief at her loyalty. "I couldn't care less about your colleague. If he hadn't tripped, I would have punched him. Whether charges are pressed doesn't faze me. I've spent a night in jail before. It's irrelevant. Besides, it could make for interesting testimony," he added with a half-smile. "Do you love him?" Tanya paused, gathering her thoughts. He could tell she was contemplating. Yes, silence was indeed a powerful tool, and his mind raced to fill the void in their conversation. Again, this didn't seem like it would end well. "He's not my boyfriend. There's absolutely nothing between us. Yes, I should have informed you about the change in plans, but it seemed trivial. Whether I was in town or Boston, you weren't expecting me, and I was still committed to the team. We were simply having dinner before retiring to our rooms. There was no reason for you to act the way you did." "You completely embarrassed me in front of my team," she exclaimed, attempting to bluff her way out of the situation. He unlocked his phone, pulled up the text, and pushed it across the coffee table to her. Judging by her expression, he could tell she recalled the picture and the situation, leaving no room for denial this time. She started speaking, without bravado. He retrieved the phone, started a voice recording app, and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Tom, our team is—" She hesitated, searching for words, very close-knit in many ways. "Most of us," she began. "We have a small group that meets regularly. They were all at Bradley's. We were the ones putting in extra effort for the proposal. You know the time I've spent preparing our pitch. I don't know exactly when it began. It was sometime after Pete became PM. We worked closely together, and I was drawn to him, and things just evolved," Tanya explained. "No explanations needed," he interrupted. "Falling into bed doesn't just happen. Decisions are made consciously. We both understand that, so please don't insult me." "So, almost 6 months," he answered one of his questions. "That's when Pete joined, right?" She nodded. "The team," he continued, "all of you." He trailed off without naming it. "I mean collectively." She nodded again. "Pete mentioned it fosters trust and team unity. Is that what convinced all of you to form a coalition group?" "Now you're being crude. It's more than that. I feel a strong connection to Pete and my team more than ever," Tanya asserted confidently. He sensed trouble brewing. "Unfortunately, you may see some changes in your team soon," Tom warned. "What did you do?" Tanya gasped. "Tom, involving others will only cause more damage. Let them make their own choices. We need to focus on us, Tanya." "I can't stay silent and be complicit. I care about Bob and Alice. In fact, I like them a lot more than Betty and Bill right now," he replied. "I texted them about the changed plans. How they handle it with their spouses is up to them. I can live with my decision." "Tom, we have the most productive team in CR Inc.'s history," she practically yelled at him. "And you benefited too, just because our team meetings were on. Wednesdays didn't mean you missed out. I never denied you access to me whenever you needed it, so I slept with my team a bit earlier. You never noticed. That picture you showed me, you want to know about it?" She sneered. "That was right after Pete finished inside me." "Yes, he came inside your loving wife. What you don't see is Betty. She took the picture just before she went down on me. So now you know you never had seconds or tasted another man's seed. If you don't know, it didn't happen, right?" Tom listened in shock as the extent of the deception and his own ignorance unfolded before him. "Now, just because you're aware, just because your fragile ego is bruised, you want to throw away all that my team and I have achieved?" Tanya hissed, her anger escalating. Tom could feel his heart rate rising as Tanya passionately defended her team's questionable dynamic. His own anger was growing by the second. For a fleeting moment during his drive home from Bradley's, he entertained the idea that perhaps forgiving Pete just this once could be possible. However, that notion had quickly met its demise. He didn't need to hear anymore, and he certainly didn't want to. But Tanya persisted. "No, sir, we won't let you off the hook. You're going to text Bob and Alice back, informing them that you heard from me and that we were stranded in Atlanta but have reservations for the morning. That's the story Betty and Bill will stick to, and you're going to support them, damn it," she shouted. "There are millions on the line with this deal, and your hurt feelings mean absolutely nothing. Send the text, and then we can discuss our next steps." "Discuss our next steps," Tom retorted. "There's no discussing it. You're leaving now. You and your twisted team, including your ringleader Pete, can carry on however you like. We're finished. I'll be contacting a lawyer this week to get the ball rolling. It's a straightforward 50-50th split. You keep your retirement, and I'll keep mine," Tom declared. "But go. You have reservations in town. Use them. Head off to Boston and chalk up another victory for you and your team." "Tom, please, send those texts," Tanya pleaded, her tone much softer now. "If we lose Betty or Bill before the presentation, the company could lose millions. You and I could miss out on tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. Just imagine all the places we could go with that money, just you and me. Forget about this and reclaim my loyalty. Please, Tom, don't let some irrational concern about meaningless encounters derail us. Pete says I'm on the fast track to executive status. All I have to do is keep delivering results for a few more years. Don't you want that for me, for us?" she implored. "Tanya, just leave," Tom managed to say before he was struck hard in the back, knocking the wind out of him as he fell to the floor with a knee pressed into his back. "Don't hurt him," Tanya interjected. "Too much," she added. "Still undecided about breaking my nose?" Pete taunted as he leaned in close to Tom's face while Tom lay pinned on the floor. "Tanya must have a bug," Tom thought. "Now I know whose team she's really on." "We'll see whose nose gets broken," Pete smirked. "Get his damn phone and type those damn texts for him. We don't have time for this nonsense." Someone pulled him up from the floor, just one individual. He pretended to be injured, causing the person behind him to exert significant force to assist him to stand. This provided him with necessary information. His captor was a weak office worker, wheezing from the effort to get Tom on his feet. Tom was catching his breath after being taken by surprise and was refocusing on the situation. In contrast to Pete and his team of well-groomed salespeople, Tom's team operated in the field with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment SOAR based in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Although his group of engineers didn't match their caliber, spending time with the crews during test missions led to the team being invited to improve their physical condition under the guidance of seasoned workers flown to missions and aircraft modified by Tom's team. If these men appeared at your doorstep, it meant the end of your days on Earth. Tom and his team designed the equipment necessary to access, and more importantly, exit hazardous locations. They took pride in their modifications, contributing to successful missions and the safe return of all involved. The members of the 160th and their formidable passengers deeply appreciated the hard work put in by Tom's crew, with Master Sergeant Troy Baker standing out as the most intimidating figure. MSGT Baker was renowned within his community. Everyone, from recruits to high-ranking officers, showed him the respect he deserved for guiding his men through missions worldwide. He was known for never leaving anyone behind. This reputation was solidified during a mission in Colombia. MSGT Baker had instructed the young LT platoon leader to stick close during their first mission. When the FARC ambushed their group, MSGT Baker thought the LT was performing well for a rookie, until he saw him on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. The medic reported that he had checked for vitals and mentioned that he was gone. Top Baker knelt down and lifted him into a fireman's carry, with the medic reiterating that he was gone. Top Baker responded to the medic's observation, stating that it might be true, but he was still coming home with them. The medic looked at him as if he had lost his mind, considering the more than 5 kilometers trek back to the LZ through dense forest. They would be fortunate to return unscathed, but carrying a deceased individual seemed like a risky decision. Anticipating the medic's thoughts, Baker assured him, "I'd do the same for you, Billy. Stay close in case I need you." What ensued became legendary. Upon their return to the base, the medic informed the doctor that the lieutenant had succumbed. The doctor nodded and retrieved a penlight from his pocket. The medic watched in amazement as the dead lieutenant's pupils contracted in the harsh beam of the penlight. The doc then asked the medic if he cared to revise his diagnosis. As they hurried the revived lieutenant into surgery, he was timeless. He didn't speak much, but when he did, everyone listened. He was a relic in an age of convenience and disposability. He was neither. He was meticulously crafted and unique, and he seemed to hold a special regard for Tom and his team. During the extended periods of downtime between missions, the MSGT expressed his gratitude by instructing Tom and the team in some basic yet effective hand-to-hand defensive techniques. He advised the engineers, "It's better to know something just in case. I understand the biggest threat you're likely to encounter is a malfunctioning copier or a nasty paper cut, but if you remain in this line of work, you may find yourself in some colorful locations. So now, if you happen to encounter one of the local colorful inhabitants, you'll have something practical to rely on," MSGT Baker explained to the group. "But let's hope a paper cut remains the scariest thing you ever have to face." Tom regulated his breathing and allowed himself to appear subdued in the grasp of his captor, while recalling the fighting techniques taught by the MSGT. There might be situations where you feel powerless and can only endure the smacking. It's unfortunate, but it happens. The key is to remember that even when you're taking a smacking, you can still fight back, you just have to outsmart your attacker. Tom remembered the lesson and subtly resisted, gradually wearing down the lone man's strength. "Give me the phone, Tom," Pete demanded, staring him down. "Now you know I've been with your wife, and that every guy on the team has had their way with her. Forget this tough guy act, Tom. You're nothing but a weak, submissive nerd. Do as we say, and maybe you'll still have a chance with Tanya when the team isn't using her. Don't forget about all the luxuries you can afford with her bonus. That should ease the pain. Who knows? Maybe Tanya will even buy you a Keyshawn robot for those times when she's busy." Tom bit his tongue as Pete took pleasure in humiliating him and coercing him into compliance. Pete demanded to know where the phone was. Spotting the outline of the phone in Tom's shirt pocket, Pete reached for it with his right hand. Tom forcefully stepped back, driving his right heel into his captor's shin, causing him to stumble in pain. Flexing his arms, Tom broke free from the hold as his captor yelped and collapsed under his own weight. Pete's eyes widened in recognition. With his right arm extended straight out, Tom rolled his shoulder as taught by the MSGT, driving his clenched fist into the center of Pete's face with full force. He felt bones shatter beneath his fist as a gush of blood poured from Pete's nose, sending him crashing to the floor. Tom turned around to identify his assailant. It was Bill, lying on the floor in tears, clutching his leg. He whimpered that he thought his foot was broken. Tom forcefully stomped on Bill's foot, causing him to scream in agony. Tom remarked, "That should clear up any uncertainty." Turning his attention back, he saw Pete on the floor, hands covering his face, attempting to rise to his knees. Approaching him, Tom leaned in close to Pete's ear and mentioned, "Looks like your nose took the punch. Guess you weren't willing to take one for the team." He then delivered a powerful punch to Pete's temple, knocking him out cold. Adrenaline pumping and breath ragged, Tom scanned the living room for Tanya. Suddenly, he felt a sharp impact to his back and neck, dropping to one knee. He spun around to confront the new attacker. Tanya stood before him, wielding a cast-iron skillet. Her swing had missed, grazing Tom's side. Rising to his feet, he roughly grabbed the pan from her hand. Tanya pleaded with Tom, expressing that they could still salvage the situation. She asked him to consider the money he would be giving up and promised to put an end to the extramarital affairs, vowing to cut them off. She suggested going back to how things were between them. Rubbing the back of his head with his left hand, Tom stared at her, astonished by her sudden transformation. He compared her to the shape-shifting alien in John Carpenter's The Thing, adapting to each new challenge. He smirked at the thought. Misinterpreting his smile as agreement, Tanya moved to embrace Tom. He held her back with his left hand, then, after a brief moment of consideration, swiftly struck her nose with his right hand, fracturing bone but not rendering her unconscious. Tanya cried out and slumped to the floor. Tom remarked, "Hurts like hell, doesn't it?" Tears streaming, vision blurred, breathing labored, and blood everywhere. "Works every time." Tanya, expressing her distress, questioned Tom's motive for punching her. Tom, unapologetic, explained that he struck her because he had the ability to do so. He continued recording the incident, convinced that he had enough evidence to justify his actions, despite the potential negative portrayal. Reflecting on the advice received from the MSGT about decisive action, Tom surveyed the room, noting Bill's distressed state and Tanya's attempts to stem the bleeding from her nose. While others remained still, Tom acknowledged the success of saving someone, giving credit to the MSGT. Discussing the aftermath, Tom expressed frustration about the consequences for Loverboy and Mr. Bill, lamenting the missed opportunities and potential financial losses. He contemplated the implications of involving the police, deciding to delay the call to maintain his chance to question Tanya. Kneeling beside her, Tom demonstrated how to address her nosebleed, but as the adrenaline subsided, he felt a sudden loss of energy. Sitting across from the woman he thought he knew, questioning her actions, Tom wondered about the true extent of Tanya's deception. Expressing disappointment in the betrayal, he inquired about her aspirations, specifically regarding her ambition to become a vice president. Tanya admitted that it could have been worthwhile if Tom had gone along with her plans, expressing regret for the setback caused by the incident. Tom pressed further, questioning the future of their relationship and the persistence of deceit, to which Tanya acknowledged the possibility and the potential continuation of dishonesty. Tom discovered from Tanya that Pete had warned her about his rigid ethics and idealistic views, advising her to break free from his influence to achieve success. In response to Tom's question about when Pete conveyed this advice, Tanya retorted, insinuating Tom's lack of knowledge about certain aspects of her relationship with Pete. Despite Tom's silence, Tanya continued sharing her perspective on career advancement. She revealed that adhering to Tom's suggestions for career enhancement yielded only a few commendations. And it wasn't until Betty offered guidance that she learned what truly worked for women in the workplace. Tanya asserted that engaging in carnal relationships for career advancement was not only effective, but also more enjoyable. Tom, still recording the conversation, processed this information. Curious about the timeline of Tanya's actions, Tom inquired if her involvement in such activities began before Pete entered the picture. Tanya, expressing impatience with his comprehension, disclosed that she initiated such actions at the company's Christmas party a year after joining CR, emphasizing her commitment to this approach ever since. "Wait, you're sleeping with the boss too, Art? Art Vanderlei?" Tom asked incredulously. "Yes, Tom. Art, Pete, Bill, anyone on the team who could help advance my career. It doesn't cost me anything to share some closeness, and it's easy to manipulate you men when I can lead you around by your desires. Especially you. Show a bit of cleavage and I could guide you wherever I needed," she stated. "Even now, thinking you have it all figured out, we informed Art of our location when we headed here. Right now, he's gathering the rest of the team, crafting a cover story for our absence. They'll have to make the pitch without us, but the extra effort with their purchasing managers should pay off." "Do I really want to hear this?" he wondered. "Oh, what the heck, why not?" "Extra effort?" Tom prodded. "You always were a go-getter, Tanya." "It was so easy, I hate to even call it effort," she laughed. "What's the old joke?" "The worst sex I ever had was great." At the BITS conference, it was straightforward with the men. We had to get a bit more creative with Brenda, the token woman on the selection board. It's funny, I can even seduce a woman, but I did throw in old Pete over there as the kicker. She was situationally bi-curious, as I recall. Her situation cleared up about the same time my tongue began lapping at her, with promises of more to come when we started working together after the contract award. "Yeah, we have the selection board covered." "Why all this then? I mean, if it's all set up, why the strong-arm tactics?" Tom asked. "That was Pete's idea, the idiot. I told him to cool off, that I would come home and please you, and be back in time to catch the flight. But he had to go all alpha. Look what that got us. So now, instead of being the face of the winning team, I'm back to dealing with Art. Like I said, fixable, but it will set me back." "You wouldn't have bought me so cheap," he said. "Maybe not," Tanya replied, "but I still would have made the flight. Well, you sure as hell ain't making that flight now, he declared. Remembering how Pete seemed so clued in, he figured Tanya must have a transmitter. Art, are you listening? I'm about to call the cops. I'm sure there's a handful of felonies involved here, and we haven't even begun to go down the rabbit trail of fraud. That's a federal contract, isn't it, Tanya? Tom asked rhetorically. Yeah, the feds take a dim view of… How did you phrase it? Extra effort. I'm sure you have great lawyers and all, Art, but maybe there's an alternative. He let it hang for a moment. Then, Tanya's cell phone ringtone played hail to the chief. Art? She asked into the phone. Of course. I'll put you on speaker. Art's voice came through the speaker. First, let me apologize to you, Tom. Pete's actions were a gross lapse of judgment. I can assure you the board will deal with him assertively. Thank you, Art. That eases my mind. Glad to see that you and the board take assault and fraud seriously. Tom, these are all unfortunate allegations. Lawyers will profit, but nobody wants to rock the boat. We might pay a fine, Pete and Bill get community service, but ultimately, you'll be divorced and half as wealthy, Art explained in a businesslike manner. Do I detect an or in this story, Art? Tom inquired. Tanya always said you were the cleverer of the two. Still, I'm happier to have hired Tanya. Yes, Tom, there most decidedly is an or, Art continued. Tom, we at CR have displaced you in your wife's affections, and when you found out and questioned it, you were treated most shabbily. Shocking, Tom chimed in sarcastically. Tom, Art continued, instead of calling the cops as you put it, suppose we could come to an agreement? I just sent a snap to Tanya's phone. Not me, one of my tech boys here. They tell me they disappear after viewing. Have a peek, perhaps that might restore some goodwill. Tanya opened the snap and turned the phone to Tom. He saw the words Bank of Grand Cayman and a number, a very large number. And when would that be deposited? Tom asked. It's already there, Tom. You have an email with the account number. This has been a very bad day for you, Tom. This may be a hard decision for you to make, and I don't discount the emotion. Tanya is a very desirable woman. Be that as it may, however, one can't take emotion to the bank, can one? One can't, Tom agreed, affecting Art's upper-crust clipped manner of speech. CR will cover the costs of your divorce. You can never reconcile, I think we all recognize that. Tanya will file. She will ask for her personal belongings and her retirement. He thought for a moment before replying. On the one hand, he could stand on principle and expose the whole sordid mess and let the chips fall. On the other hand, he could just walk away. Art had just given him 5 million reasons to do just that. Does CR have a medical staff, Art? Tom asked. Ah, yes, Tom, I believe we have some physicians on retainer, Art replied. Good, Tom said. You better load a few into a limo and send them over here to pick up your team. Are we in agreement then, Art? Tanya, Tom replied. Precisely, Art agreed. Are we done, Tom? Art asked. Goodbye, Art, Tom said, and ended the call. Tom put his phone away, turned off the recording app, and slipped it back into his pocket. I knew you would see it our way, Tom. We can still be friends. Friends with benefits when this is all over. She summoned up what she thought was her most winning smile. But even her incandescent smile couldn't reverse the effects of her ruined nose. Her eyes were turning black, and the blood was crusted under her nose, dried drips down to her chin. Tom found the sight comical and allowed himself a smile. Once again, Tanya misread his smile for agreement and leaned in to kiss him. Tom extended his right hand to halt Tanya, using it to gently push her back until she landed on the couch with a thud. Expressing disdain, he questioned the notion of wanting to kiss her, leaving Tanya hurt and looking up at him. Declaring his decision, Tom insisted that she remove whatever she wanted by the next day. Walking toward the door, he stopped beside Bill, inquiring about his injured foot. Dismissive of Bill's complaints, Tom kicked him in the groin, causing Bill to curl up and moan. Approaching Pete, who had managed to sit up, Tom assured him he wouldn't physically damage him. Pete, relieved, smiled, but it quickly vanished when Tom's foot applied pressure to Pete's groin. Rolling onto his side in pain, Pete watched as Tom exited the room. He got into his car, unsure where he was going, but food and shelter were high on the hierarchy of needs scale for a good reason. He grabbed a burger from a takeout place, checked into a Red Roof Inn just outside of town near the freeway, and fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Despite enduring numerous physical strains from various injuries, he rose. Early the following morning and reluctantly got out of bed. While preparing motel room coffee, his phone chimed, and he eagerly grabbed it. The text message came from the number, and he opened it promptly. Sorry for yesterday. I can meet, thank God it's Friday at the mall. Nish, I'll wave you over to seats at the bar. I'll be there, he replied, and poured the lukewarm brown water from the coffee maker carafe into the paper cup, With determination, he set up his laptop, gearing up for some online banking, reflecting on his college days, a time predating his relationship with Tanya. Tom recalled his economics professor's advice to maintain an offshore account for unforeseen circumstances. With his professor's assistance, he had established a bank account in the Cayman Islands, which he fondly referred to as his go-to-hell fund. Over the past decade, he diligently contributed to it, and now he boasted an impressive sum of close to $50,000. Tom felt a sense of pride, knowing that his go-to-hell fund was about to receive a significant boost. Tom accessed the secure website for each bank. With his passcode and several keystrokes, he transferred the bulk of CR's payment into his personal account, leaving $100,000 in the original account. After a shower, a change, and getting ready, he headed out to meet the mystery texter. Tom entered "Thank God it's Friday" just past noon. As he entered, he noticed a man waving him over. The man appeared to be about Tom's age, well-dressed and handsome. Tom approached him. "I believe you sent me a text," Tom said as he sat down. "I'm sorry for how it turned out." "I don't know if there was any clean way to tell you," the stranger began. "Why don't you start with who you are and your connection to Tanya?" Tom replied. "I was on the team. I left the Army after 8 years, wounded in action, and had a lengthy recovery before being medically discharged. I joined CR about 6 months ago and was assigned to Pete's team around 3 months ago. While talking to a friend about the job, I mentioned working for Tanya. When he asked for her full name, we realized we had a mutual friend, and he asked me to watch out for Tanya as a favor. At first, everything was great. I was warmly welcomed to the team. It didn't take long to find out why," he started. "About 2 months in, Tanya approached me. She's extremely attractive and compelling, but when I asked her about her ring, she just smiled and told me you were okay with it. I wasn't, and said so. That started the deep freeze. After I turned her down, I got all the undesirable assignments and nothing but grief from Pete. I called our mutual friend back and told him about Tanya approaching me. He told me about you and thought that pimping your wife for pay seemed out of character for the man he knew. He believed there was more to it than Tanya let on, and that you needed to know. Pete sent me the pic when they were trying to get me on board with the team, kind of a prize I could expect if I went along. Let's just say I don't agree with their methods. I resigned yesterday and sent you the text." "Our friend?" Tom asked. "Troy Baker." "If I hadn't met Troy," he replied, then paused a moment before continuing. "Let's just say he helped me out of a scrape when I was a green lieutenant. I owe him a favor or two." "Don't we both?" Tom agreed. "What are you going to do?" "Art pretty much laid it all out for me. I could get the cops involved, and yes, Bill, Pete, and even Tanya would face legal problems. But with his lawyers, it would all end up as a bump in the road. We made a deal. You might think I'm selling out, and maybe you're right in a way. But they stole the only thing I had that was irreplaceable. If I can't make them pay legally, well, at least I can make them pay. It won't bring Tanya back, but I think I may find she's less irreplaceable than I thought. I have a trip planned. Tell Troy thanks for everything. I won't be going back to work." "What about you?" Tom asked finally. "Well, Troy always spoke highly of Baxter Inc. Now that you're gone, they might just need another engineer. I think you'll find they do business a bit differently at Baxter, maybe more to your liking. Challenging, but the fringe benefits won't compare to what Tanya's team was offering." Tom smiled, expressing his acceptance of the arrangement. The stranger stood up, prompting Tom to do the same. With a simple nod to each other, they left without exchanging any further words. Fast forward to Monday, Tom had just completed the check-in process for his flight to Costa Rica. As he contemplated the upcoming relaxation in Tamarindo, he headed toward security. Spotting a mailbox, he pulled out an envelope from his pocket, addressed to the DOJ in Washington, D.C., containing a thumb drive with a recording. He thought it might pique their interest, considering the possibility that Art's legal team might not be as formidable as assumed. Tom dropped the envelope into the box before proceeding into the security line. Update 9 months later, seated at his usual table in the cafe, Tom received mail from Anna, who brought him his cerveza. "Thank you, dear," he said, raising the bottle to his lips. Holding the envelope, he wondered who had found him. Not going to great lengths to stay hidden, finding him in a little town on the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica would have required resources beyond the ordinary guy's reach. His first thought was that Art's people had found him. Letting the envelope sit at his house for 2 days, he was fairly certain it wasn't a bomb, yet. You can't be too careful. "Carlos," Tom called out to the cafe owner. "Toselo si, Senor Tom?" Tom handed over the envelope and stepped back a few paces. Can never be too careful, he thought as Carlos cut open the envelope. He handed it to Tom, who thanked him, took another pull from his beer bottle, and turned the envelope over. Several sheets of paper fell onto the table. picking up a note that said, "Thought you would find this interesting," along with a phone number. The number Tom thought Troy would have the resources to find him. I can live with that. Flipping the other piece of paper over, he found a copy of a newspaper article with a picture. The photo depicted Pete, Bill, Tanya, and Betty being led out of the CR building in handcuffs. The headline for the article read, "4 indicted in multi-million-dollar procurement fraud." He smiled. Maybe Art's lawyers aren't everything he thought they were, he said to himself, a habit he picked up since his Spanish was weak and English wasn't widely spoken. He liked to hear English conversation, even if it was just him talking to himself. "Ana, otra cerveza," he said, holding up his empty bottle. "Sí, mister." "Gracias," Anna said as she accepted his beer. Tom took a swallow and looked out at the deep blue Pacific. Tanya, who,